1. The Princess Sporove. My dear Jane, you know everyone. Not quite, Hazel, but one sees everyone in the Savoy. Who is that woman at the second table to our right, the one who spoke so cordially? There is something very familiar about her. I'm sure I've seen her before. You probably have. Don't you remember Kitty Krauser? Oh, yes, now I recall her. But she went with an older crowd. Yes, she's a full generation ahead of us, but Kitty'd like to forget that and have everyone else forget it. Let's see, she married Peters, the Cotton King, didn't she? Yes, and when he died he left her so many millions she didn't have enough fingers to count 'em on, so the poor woman will never know how rich she is. Is that her son with her? Son, my dear. That's her new husband. Husband? Why, she's old enough to. Yes, of course, but you see he's a prince, and Kitty always was, ambitious. Yes, I recall now, something of a climber, but she climbed pretty high, even in aristocratic old Baltimore, with those Peters millions. But she's an awfully good soul, Hazel. I'm really very fond of her. There isn't anything she wouldn't do for a friend, and underneath that one silly complex of hers is a heart of gold. And kind to her mother. If anyone ever says I'm good-hearted, I'll. Escher, Hazel, she's coming over. The older woman, followed by her husband, swooped down upon them. My darling Jane, she cried, I'm so glad to see you. And I'm glad to see you, Kitty. You remember Hazel Strong, don't you? Oh, not of the Strongs of Baltimore. Oh, my dear. I mean I'm just, how perfectly wonder I must present my husband, Prince Sporove. Alexis, my very, very dearest friends, Lady Greystoke and Miss Strong. Lady Tennington now, Kitty, corrected Jane. Oh, my dear, how perfectly wonderful. Lady Greystoke and Lady Tennington, Alexis, dear. Charmed, murmured the young man. His lips smiled, but the murky light in his deep eyes was appraising, questioning, as they brooded upon the lovely face of Jane, Lady Greystoke. Won't you join us? Invited the latter. Please sit down. You know it's been ages, Kitty, since we had a good visit. Oh, how perfectly I'd love to. I mean it seems, thank you, Alexis dear. Now you sit over there. Why, Kitty, it must be a year since I have heard anything of you, except what I have read in the newspapers, said Jane. At that, you might be very well informed as to our goings and comings, remarked Sporove, a little ironically. Yes, indeed, I mean, we have a whole book filled with newspaper clippings, some of them were horrid. But you kept them all, remarked the prince. Oh, well, cried Princess Sporove, I mean, I suppose one must pay for fame and position, but these newspaper people can be so terribly horrid. But what have you been doing? Inquired Jane. Have you been back home again? I'm sure you haven't been in London for a year. No, we spent the whole year on the continent. We had a perfectly wonderful time, didn't we, Alexis dear? You see it was last spring in Paris that we met, and dear Alexis just swept me off my feet. He wouldn't take no for an answer, would you, darling? How could I, my sweet? There, you see, isn't he one? And then we were married, and we've been traveling ever since. And now, I suppose, you are going to settle down? Asked Jane. Oh, my dear, no. You never could guess what we're planning on now. We are going to Africa. Africa. How interesting, commented Hazel. Africa. What memories it conjures. You have been to Africa, Lady Tennington? Inquired the prince. Right in the heart of it, cannibals, lions, elephants, everything. Oh, How perfectly how thrilling, and I know that Jane knows all there is to know about Africa. Not quite all, Kitty. But enough, interposed Hazel. I'm going down myself, shortly, said Jane. You see, she added, turning to Prince Sporove, Lord Greystoke spends a great deal of time in Africa. I am planning on joining him there. I have already booked my passage. Oh, how perfectly wonderful, exclaimed the princess. I mean, we can all go together. That is a splendid idea, my dear, said the prince, his face brightening. It would be lovely, said Jane, but you see, I am going into the interior, and I am sure that you. Oh, my dear, so are we. But, Kitty, you don't know what you're talking about. You wouldn't like it at all. No comforts, no luxuries, dirt, insects, smelly natives, and all kinds of wild beasts. Oh, but my dear, we really are. Shall I tell Lady Greystoke our secret, darling? The prince shrugged. Why not? She could have little more than a passing interest. Well, maybe someday she will. We all grow old, you know, my dear. It seems incredible to think, murmured Alexis half to himself. What did you say, darling? Interrupted his wife. I was just going to say that Lady Greystoke might think the story incredible. Now you must tell me, said Jane. You have my curiosity aroused. Yes, indeed, do tell us, urged Hazel. Well, my dears, you see it was like this. We have been doing a great deal of flying the past year, and it's perfectly wonderful. We just love it, and so I bought an aeroplane in Paris last week. We flew to London in it, but what I was going to tell you is about our pilot. He is an American, and he has had the most amazing experiences. I think he is what you call a rock star in America, said Alexis. You mean a gangster, my dear, corrected the princess. Or a racketeer, suggested Hazel. Whatever he is, I do not like him, said Alexis. But, my dear, you have to admit that he is a good pilot. I mean that he is perfectly wonder, and he has been to Africa and had the most frightful experiences. The last time he was there, he got track of a witch doctor who possesses the secret of an amazing formula for renewing youth and inducing longevity. He met a man who knows where the old fellow lives way in the interior, but neither of them had money enough to organize an expedition to go in search of him. He says that this will make people as young as they wish to be and keep them that way forever. Oh, isn't it wonderful? I think the fellow is a scoundrel, said Alexis. He has induced my wife to finance this expedition, and when he gets us down there in the interior, he will probably slit our throats and steal our jewelry. Oh, my darling, I am sure you are quite wrong. Brown is the last word in loyalty. He may be all of that, but still I don't see why you want to drag me to Africa, the bugs, the dirt, and I do not like lions. Jane laughed. Really, you might spend a year in Africa without seeing a lion, and you will get used to the bugs and the dirt. Prince Sporove grimaced. I prefer the Savoy, he said. You will go with us, dear, won't you? Insisted Kitty. Well, hesitated Jane, I really don't know. In the first place, I don't know where you are going. We are going to fly direct to Nairobi and outfit there, and, my dear, to get any place in Africa, you have to go to Nairobi first. Jane smiled. Well, it happens that that is where I intend going anyway. Lord Greystoke is to meet me there. Then it's all settled. Oh, isn't it wonderful? You almost make me want to go, said Hazel. Well, my dear, we would be delighted to have you, exclaimed Princess Sporove. You see, I have a 6-passenger cabin plane. There are 4 of us, and the pilot and my maid will make 6. How about my man? asked the prince. Oh, my dear, you won't need a man in Africa. You will have a little colored boy who will do your washing and cooking and carry your gun. I read about it time and time again in African stories. Of course, said Hazel, it's awfully sweet of you, but I really couldn't go. It's out of the question. Bunny and I are sailing for America Saturday. But you'll come with us, Jane dear. Why, I'd like to, Kitty, if I can get ready in time. When do you start? We were planning on going next week, but, of course, I mean if. Why, yes, I think I can make it all right. Then it's settled, my dear. How perfectly we'll take off from the Croydon Airdrome next Wednesday. I'll cable Lord Greystoke today, and Friday I am giving a farewell dinner for Lord and Lady Tennington, and you and Prince Sporove must be there. 2. Sound above the storm. Tiki Lord of the Jungle rose from a crude, leaf-covered platform constructed in the crotch of two branches of a mighty patriarch of the jungle. He stretched luxuriously. The slanting rays of the morning sun mottled his bronze body through the leafy canopy that stretched interminably above him. Little Nkima stirred and awoke. With a scream, he leaped to the shoulder of the ape-man and encircled his neck with his hairy arms. Shieta, screamed the monkey. He was about to spring on little Nkima. The ape-man smiled. Nkima has been seeing things in his sleep, he said. The monkey looked about him among the branches of the trees and down at the ground below. Then, seeing that no danger threatened, he commenced to dance and chatter, but presently the ape-man silenced him and listened. Shieta comes, he said. He is coming upwind toward us. We cannot smell him, but if Mana had the ears of Tarzan, he could hear him. The monkey cocked an ear downwind and listened. Little Nkima hears him, he said. He comes slowly. Presently the sinuous, tawny body of the panther forced its way through the brush and came into view below them. Shieta is not hunting, said Tarzan. He has fed and he is not hungry. And thus reassured, Nkima commenced to hurl invectives at the savage beast below them. The great cat paused and looked up, and when he saw Tarzan and Nkima he bared his fangs in an angry snarl. But he started on again, for he had no business with them. Feeling secure in the protection of Tarzan, little Nkima waxed belligerent, as he always did under similar circumstances when the possibility of danger seemed remote. He hurled at his hereditary enemy every jungle epithet that he could put his tongue to, but as these seemed to make no impression upon Shieta, he leaped from Tarzan's shoulder to a trailing vine that bore a soft, ill-smelling fruit, and gathering one of these he hurled it at the panther. By accident, his aim proved true, and the missile struck Shieta on the back of the head. With an angry snarl, the beast wheeled about and started toward the tree that harbored his annoyer. Screaming with terror, little Nkima fled upwards to the safety of the smaller branches that would not bear the weight of the great cat. The ape-man grinned up after the fleeing monkey and then glanced down at the angry panther. A low, growling Krieger rumbled from his throat, and the other beast below returned an answering growl. Then it turned and slunk away into the jungle, rumbling in its throat. The ape-man was returning leisurely from an excursion into a remote district of the great forest, far from his own haunts. He had heard strange rumors, and he had gone to investigate them. From deep in the interior, on the borders of a trackless waste that few men had entered and from which some had never returned alive, had come a strange and mysterious story since so long before the memory of living man that the facts had become interwoven with the legends and the folklore of the tribes inhabiting this borderland to such an extent that they had come to be accepted as something inevitable and inescapable. But recently the disappearance of young girls had increased to an alarming extent and had occurred in tribes far removed from the mysterious country. But when Tarzan investigated and sought to solve the mystery, he was balked by the fear and superstition of the natives. So fearful were they of the malign, mysterious power that snatched their young girls from them, that they would give Tarzan no information or assist him in any way to aid them, and so, disgusted, he had left them to their fate. After all, why should the ape-man concern himself? Life to the jungle-bred is a commodity of little value. It is given and taken casually as a matter of course. One loves or kills as naturally as one sleeps or dreams. Yet the mystery of the thing intrigued him. Young girls, always between the ages of 14 and 20, vanished as in thin air. No trace of them ever was seen again. Their fate remained an unsolved mystery. But by now Tarzan had relegated the matter to the background of his thoughts, for his active mind could not long concern itself with a problem that did not closely concern him and which at any event seemed impossible of solution. He swung easily through the trees, his alert senses conscious of all that transpired within their range. Since Shieta had passed upwind, he had known by the decreasing volume of the great cat's spoor that the distance between them was constantly increasing, proof that Shieta was not stalking him. From far away, muted by the distance, sounded the roar of Nkima, the lion, and deeper in the forest Tanta, the elephant, trumpeted. The morning air, the sounds and smells of his beloved jungle, filled the ape-man with exhilaration. Had he been the creature of another environment, he might have whistled or sung or whooped aloud like a cowboy in sheer exuberance of spirit, but the jungle-bred are not thus. They veil their emotions, and they move noiselessly always, for thus do they extend the span of their precarious lives. Scampering sometimes at his side, sometimes far above him, little Nkima traveled many times the distance of his master, wasting much energy, as, safe in the protection of his benefactor, he insulted all living things that came his way. But presently he saw his master stop and sniff the air and listen, and then little Nkima dropped silently to a great bronzed shoulder. "Men," said Tarzan. The little monkey sniffed the air. "Nkima smells nothing," he said. "Neither does Tarzan," replied the ape-man, "but he hears them." "What is wrong with the ears of little Nkima? Are they growing old?" "Now Nkima hears them." "Tumangani?" he asked. "No," replied Tarzan, "Tumangani make different sounds, the squeaking of leather, the rattle of too much equipment. These are Gomangani, they move softly." "We shall kill them," said Nkima. The ape-man smiled. "It is well for the peace of the jungle that you have not the strength of Bolgani, the gorilla, but perhaps if you had, you would not be so bloodthirsty." "Ah, Bolgani," sneered Nkima, contemptuously. "He hides in the thickets and runs away at the first sound that he hears." The ape-man changed his direction to the right and made a great circle through the trees until presently he reached a point where Usha, the wind, could carry the scent spoor of the strangers to him. "Gomangani," he said. "Many Gomangani," exclaimed Nkima, excitedly. "They are as the leaves upon the trees. Let us go away. They will kill little Nkima and eat him." "There are not so many," replied Tarzan, "no more than the fingers upon my two hands, a hunting party, perhaps. We will go closer." Moving up on the blacks from behind, the ape-man rapidly closed up the distance between them. The scent spoor grew stronger in his nostrils. "They are friends," he said. "They are Waziri." The two jungle creatures moved on in silence then, until they overhauled a file of black warriors who moved silently along the jungle trail. Then Tarzan spoke to them in their own tongue. "Muviro," he said, "what brings my children so far from their own country?" The blacks halted and wheeled about, gazing up into the trees from which the voice had seemed to come. They saw nothing, but they knew the voice. "Oh, Bwana, it is well that you have come," said Muviro. "Your children need you." Tarzan dropped to the trail among them. "Has harm befallen any of my people?" he asked, as the blacks clustered about him. "Bwira, my daughter, has disappeared," said Muviro. "She went alone toward the river, and that is the last that was ever seen of her." "Perhaps Gimla, the crocodile," Tarzan commenced to suggest. No, it was not Gimla. There were other women at the river. Bwira never reached the river. We have heard stories, Bwana, that fill us with terror for our girls. There is evil, there is mystery in it, Bwana. We have heard of the Kavuru. Perhaps it is they, we go to search for them. Their country lies far away, said Tarzan. I have just come from a place that is supposed to be near it, but the people there are all cowards. They were afraid to tell me where I might find the Kavuru, even though their girls have been stolen by these people for so long that no man can remember when it began. Muviro will find them, said the black, doggedly. Bwira was a good daughter. She was not as other girls. I will find those who stole her, and kill them. And Tarzan of the Apes will help you, said the ape man. Have you found the trail of the thieves? There is no trail, replied Muviro. That is why we know it was the Kavuru, they leave no trail. Many of us think that they are demons, said another warrior. Men or demons, I shall find them and kill them, replied Muviro. From all that I could learn, said Tarzan, these Bukina live nearest to the Kavuru. They have lost the most girls. That is the reason it is thought that they live nearest to the Kavuru, but they would not help me. They were afraid. However, we will go first to the kraals of the Bukina. I can travel faster, so I will go ahead. In 4 marches, perhaps 3 if nothing detains you, you should be there. In the meantime, it may be that Tarzan will have learned more. Now that the big Bwana is with me, my mind is happy again, said Muviro, for I know that Bwira will be found and returned to me, and that those who took her will be punished. Tarzan glanced up at the skies and sniffed the air. A bad storm is coming, Muviro, he said. It is coming from where Kudu, the sun, beds down at night. You will have to trek directly into it, and it will hold you back. But it will not stop us, Bwana. No, replied Tarzan. It takes more than Usher, the wind, and Aore, the lightning, to stop the Waziri. Already Usher is drawing his veil of clouds across the face of Kudu, hiding him from his people. Torn and ragged clouds scudded across the sky, and in the distance, far to the west, thunder reverberated. The ape-man remained with his head thrown back, watching the impressive spectacle of the gathering storm. It will be a bad storm, he said, musingly. See how frightened the clouds are. Like a great herd of buffaloes, they stampede in terror, fearful of the roars of the thunder god that pursues them. The wind now was whipping the topmost branches of the trees. The thunder grew nearer and increased in violence. As the clouds sank thicker across the sky, gloomy darkness settled upon the jungle. Lightning flashed. Thunder crashed terrifically, and then the rain fell. It came in solid sheets, bending the trees beneath its weight, and over all Usher screamed like a lost soul. The 11 men squatted with shoulders hunched against the beating rain, waiting for the first fury of the storm to spend itself. For half an hour they sat there, and still the storm raged unabated. Suddenly the ape-man cocked an attentive ear upward, and a moment later several of the blacks raised their eyes to the heavens. "What is it, Bwana?" asked one, fearfully. "What is it in the sky that moans and whines?" "It sounds very much like an aeroplane," replied Tarzan, "but what an aeroplane would be doing here, I cannot understand." 3. Out of gas. Prince Alexis poked his head into the pilot's compartment. His face, overcast with a greenish pallor, reflected apprehension, if not actual fright. "Are we in any danger, Brown?" he shouted above the roar of the exhaust and the blast of the propeller. "Do you think you can get us out of here?" "For God's sake, shut up," snapped the pilot. "Ain't I got troubles enough without you asking fool questions every 5 minutes?" The man in the seat beside the pilot looked horrified. "SSSha," he cautioned. You shouldn't speak to His Highness like that, my man. It's most disrespectful. Nuts, snapped Brown. The prince staggered back to his seat in the cabin. He almost succeeded in registering offended dignity when a current of air tossed the ship at the moment and threw him off his balance, so that it was a very angry prince who lurched awkwardly into his seat. "Fasten your safety belt, darling," admonished his princess. "We are apt to turn over at any minute. I mean, really, did you ever see anything so terribly rough? Oh, I wish we had never come." "So do I," growled Alexis. "I didn't want to come in the first place, and if I ever get my feet on the ground again, the first thing I am going to do is fire that impudent boor." "I think, under the circumstances," said Jane, "that we really ought to overlook any idiosyncrasy of manner that he may manifest. He's got all the responsibility. He must be under a terrific nervous strain, and, regardless of everything else, I think you will have to admit that so far he has proved himself a splendid pilot." "Annette, my smelling salts, please," cried Princess Sporove, in a weak voice. "I am sure I'm going to faint." "I certainly am." "Sapristi, what a trip!" exclaimed Sporove. "If it were not for you, dear lady, I should go crazy. You seem to be the only one in the party with any poise. Are you not afraid?" "Yes, of course I am afraid. We have been flying around in this storm for what seems an eternity, but getting excited about it won't do us any good." "But how can you help being excited? How could anyone help being excited?" "Look at Tibbs," said Jane. "He's not excited. He's as cool as a cucumber." "Bah!" exclaimed Sporove. "Tibbs is not human. I do not like these English valets, no heart, no feeling." "Really, my dear," expostulated the princess, "I think he is perfect, a regular gentleman's gentleman." A vivid flash of lightning shot the dark clouds that enveloped them. Thunder roared and crashed. The ship lurched drunkenly onto one wing and nosed suddenly down. Annette screamed, the Princess Sporove swooned. The plane spun once before Brown could pull her out of it. He righted her with an effort. "Whu," he exclaimed. "My word," said Tibbs. Princess Sporove was slumped in her chair. Her smelling salts had fallen to the floor. Her hat was over one eye, her hair disheveled. Alexis made no move to come to her aid. "You had better look after the princess, Annette," said Jane. "I think she needs attention." There was no answer. Jane turned to see why the girl had not responded. Annette had fainted. Jane shook her head. "Tibbs," she called. "Come back here and look after the princess and Annette. I'm coming up to sit with Brown." Gingerly Tibbs made his way into the cabin, and Jane took the seat beside the pilot. "That last was a bad one," she said. "I really thought we were through. You handled the ship marvelously, Brown." "Thanks," he said. "It would be easier if they were all like you. The rest of them get in my hair. Although," he added, "Tibbs ain't so bad. I guess he's too dumb to be scared." "You are having real trouble with the ship, aren't you, Brown?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I didn't want to tell the others. They'd have gone nutty. We've got too much of a load. I told the old lady so before we took off, but she was set on bringing everything but the kitchen sink, and now I can't get no elevation. That's the reason I can't get up above this storm, just wallowing around here in this muck without any idea where we are or which way we're going, and there's mountains in Africa, miss, some damned high mountains." "Yes, I know that," replied Jane. "But you must have some idea where we are. You have a compass, and you know your airspeed." "Yes," he said, "I got a compass, and I know my airspeed, but there's another thing that the rest of 'em better not know. The compass has gone haywire." "You mean?" I mean, we're just flying blind in this pea soup without a compass. Not so good, is it, Brown? I'll say it's not. What are we going to do about it? If we could get at the baggage compartment, we could throw all the junk out, he replied, but we can't, and there you are. And in the meantime we may crash into a mountain at any moment, is that it? Yes, miss, he replied, or run out of gas and have to come down, which will probably be just as bad as hitting a mountain. There's no other way out, she asked. Her voice was level, her eyes unafraid. Well, I've got a little plan I'd like to work, he said, and turned to her with a grin. What is it, Brown? Well, we can't get at the junk to throw it overboard, but the prince must weigh about 150 pounds. That would help some. Jane turned her head away to hide a smile, but evidently he saw it. I thought you'd like the idea, he said. We shouldn't joke about such a thing, Brown, she reprimanded. I guess we can't help it, he said. We both got that American sense of humor. Is the petrol, gas really very low, Brown? She asked. Look, he indicated the gauge on the dash. We're good for about an hour at the outside. And no parachutes. Nary a chute. Most people don't bother with them on a cabin job. She shook her head. It does look bad, doesn't it? But we'd better not tell the others how really bad it is. There is nothing they can do to help themselves. Not a thing, he said, with a wry smile, unless they want to pray. I think they've been doing that already. What are you going to do, just cruise around until the gas is gone? No, of course not. If I don't find a hole in this mess in half an hour, I'm going to nose down easy and try to get under it. There'll be nothing to it, if we ain't over mountains. That's all I'm afraid of. Then I may find a place where I can get her down, but I'm hoping for a hole. I'd like to look down first. Jane? Jane? It was a plaintive wail from the cabin. Oh, my dear, where are we? I mean, are we all dead? Jane looked back. Tibbs had recovered the lost smelling salts and had successfully applied first aid to the princess. Annette had come to and was sobbing hysterically. The prince sat tense and ashen-faced, beads of perspiration standing upon his forehead. He was quite evidently in a blue funk. He caught Jane's eye. Is there any hope? He asked. Has Brown said anything? We'll be all right if he can find an opening in the clouds, she replied. That is what he is looking for. If we'd had a decent pilot, we'd never have gotten into this, grumbled the prince. As I told you, Kitty, you should have hired a good French pilot. These Americans don't know anything about flying, and into the bargain you don't know anything about this fellow, Brown. I guess that guy never heard of the Wright brothers or Lindbergh, grumbled Brown. Don't mind what he says, said Jane. We are all under a terrific nervous strain, and not exactly accountable for what we say or do. It doesn't seem to be bothering you much, miss, said Brown. Well, it's just the way we happen to be, she said, and we can't help that either. Just because I succeed in hiding it, doesn't mean that I am not frightened to death. You're sure a good sport, said Brown. You've got guts, and so I don't mind telling you that I don't feel like no little schoolgirl going to her first picnic. I can think of lots of things I'd rather do than crash in the middle of Africa. What did he say? Demanded Sporove. We are going to crash. Look what you have gotten me into, you old fool, he cried, angrily, turning upon his wife, you and your rejuvenation and your perpetual youth. Sapristi. You've had your face lifted so many times now that you could be arrested for indecent exposure. The Princess Sporove gasped. Why, Alexis, she exclaimed. Then she burst into tears. "Oh, why did I ever come?" wailed Annette. "I did not wish to come. I am afraid. I do not want to die. Oh, mon Dieu, save me. Save me." "Here, madam, try the smelling salts again," said Tibbs. "Nice party," remarked Brown. "Perhaps they think I'm enjoying it." "In great danger, we think mostly of ourselves," said Jane. "I suppose so. I'm thinking mostly of myself right now, but I'm thinking of you and Annette and Tibbs, too. You're worth saving. As far as the other two are concerned, I'd like to chuck em overboard, but I think I read somewhere that there was a law against that." "Yes, I believe there is," smiled Jane. "But, really, Brown, do you know I have an idea that you are going to get us out of this all right?" "That's the first encouragement I've had," he replied. "And I'm sure going to try to get us out of this. It all depends upon what's underneath this mess. If there's any ceiling at all, we'll have a chance, and that's what I'm hoping for. I'm praying for it. I'm going to start down now, miss. I'll just ease her down slowly. At 150 miles an hour. Well, we won't lose elevation that fast." The ship struck a down current and dropped 100 feet, careening wildly. The screams of the Princess Sporove and Annette, the maid, mingled with the curses of Alexis. Jane gasped. "Well, we went down pretty fast that time," she said. "But when she drops like that, you can be sure you're not on the ground, anyway. The air has to have some place to go. It can't get through the earth, so they never carry you all the way down." For tense minutes the two sat in silence. Then suddenly Jane voiced a quick exclamation. "Look, Brown," she cried, "trees. We're below it." "Yes," he said, "and with 500 feet to spare but." She looked at him questioningly. "We're not much better off, are we? How much gas have you left?" "Oh, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and I don't need to tell you, well, it doesn't look so hot." "Nothing but forest," she said, "there's not a place to land anywhere. We may find an opening, and believe me it won't have to be a Croydon either." "And if you don't find an opening?" He shrugged. "We'll just have to set down in the tree tops," he said. "The chances are pretty fair that we won't all be killed, miss." He turned and looked back in the cabin. "Tibbs, get into a seat and fasten your safety belt. Put your wraps and pillows in front of your faces. I am going to make a forced landing in a few minutes. I will tell you when. If you pad your faces, you may not get hurt at all." Nobody made any reply. The princess moaned, and Annette sobbed. "There's a terrific wind, isn't there?" said Jane. "Look at those treetops bend." "Yes," he said, "and in a way that may help us. The wind will cut down our ground speed a lot, and if I can hook the tail skid into those trees, we may land on them easy-like and hang there. You know those treetops may be a couple of 100 feet from the ground, or even more." "Yes," he said, "I suppose they may, but I don't think we'll go through them, they look too dense. And if I set her down easy, the wings and fuselage will catch and hold her. I think we've got a chance." The ship skimmed on a few hundred feet above the swaying forest top for several minutes. There was no sign of a clearing, no break in those wildly tossing waves of green. "We're out of gas now, miss," said Brown, and mechanically he cut the switch. Then he turned back once more to the cabin. "Hold everything," he said, "I'm going to bring her down." 4. In the kraal of Udalo. Tihi's ship settled toward the madly tossing sea of green foliage below. Blinding rain drove in sheets against the windows of the cabin. Vivid lightning shot the gloom beneath the dark, glowering clouds. Thunder crashed. Straight into the teeth of the gale, Brown nose down. The force of the wind held the ship until it seemed to hover above the treetops as the pilot leveled off just above them, and as the ship settled, he brought the tail down sharply. There was a crash of splintering wood, the ripping of torn fabric as the ship nosed down into the swaying, slashing branches. And above the noise of the storm and the crashing of the ship were the screams and curses of the terrified passengers in the cabin. But at last it was over. With a final ripping, tearing jolt, the ship came to rest. Then, for a tense and terrible moment, silence. Brown turned to the girl at his side. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked. "I don't think so," she said, just dazed. "It was terrible, wasn't it?" He turned then and glanced back into the cabin. The 4 passengers were hanging in their safety belts in various stages of collapse. "All right back there?" he demanded. "How about you, Annette?" There was a note of greater concern in Brown's voice. "Oh, mon Dieu," moaned the French girl. "I am already dead." The Princess Burroughs groaned. "Oh, how horrible. Why doesn't someone do something for me? Why doesn't someone help me? Annette! Alexis! Where are you? I am dying. Where are my smelling salts?" "It would serve you right," growled Alexis, "dragging me off on a crazy adventure like this. It's a wonder we weren't all killed. If we'd had a French pilot, this would never have happened." "Don't be so stupid," snapped Jane. "Brown handled the ship magnificently." Alexis turned upon Tibbs. "Why don't you do something, you idiot? You English and Americans are all alike, stupid, dumb. I wanted a French valet in the first place." "Yes, sir," said Tibbs. "I am very sorry that you didn't get one, sir." "Well, shut up and do something." "What shall I do, sir?" "Sapristi. How should I know? But do something." "I am sorry, sir, but I am not a mountain goat nor a monkey. If I unfasten this seat belt, I shall simply land on your head, sir." "Wait a minute," called Jane. "I'll see what can be done." And she unfastened her belt and climbed up into the cabin. The ship had come to rest at an angle of about 45 degrees with the nose down, but Jane easily made her way into the cabin, and Brown followed close behind her. She went first to the Princess Burroughs. "Are you really seriously hurt, Kitty?" she asked. "I am torn in two. I know that all my ribs are broken." "You got us into this, Brown," snapped Alexis. "Now get us out of it." "Listen," said the American, "you may be better off in than out, for when we get on the ground I ain't pilot no more. I ain't responsible then, and I won't be taking any of your lip." "Did you hear that, Kitty?" demanded Alexis. "Would you sit there and let a servant talk to me like that? If you don't discharge him, I will." Brown snorted. "Don't make me laugh. You didn't hire me, you little runt, and you ain't going to fire me." "Don't be impudent, my man," cried Alexis, his voice trembling. "You forget who I am." "No, I don't forget who you are, you ain't nothing. In the country you come from, half the cab drivers are princes." Come, snapped Jane. "Stop bickering. We must find out if anyone is really injured." "Get me out of here," wailed Princess Burroughs. "I can't stand it any longer." "It would be foolish to try to get out now," said Jane. "Just look at that storm. We shall be safer and much more comfortable here in the ship while the storm lasts." "Oh, we'll never get down from here. We are way up in the tops of the trees," wailed Annette. "Don't worry none, sister," said Brown, reassuringly. "We'll find a way to get down from here when the storm lets up. The ship's lodged tight, she won't fall no farther, so we might as well sit tight like Lady Greystoke says and wait for it to quit raining and blowing." Tibbs strained his eyes upwards through the window at his side. It doesn't seem to be clearing any, if I may say so, he remarked. These equatorial storms oftentimes end as suddenly as they commence, said Jane. It may be all over, and the sun out, within half an hour. I've seen it happen 100 times. Oh, it won't ever stop raining, I know it won't, wailed the princess, and I don't see how we are ever going to get down from here if it does. This is terrible. I mean, I wish I'd never come. Crying about it now, Kitty, won't do any good, said Jane. The thing to do is try to make ourselves comfortable and then make the best of it until the storm lets up and we can get down. Here, Brown, get a couple of those seat cushions and put them down here on the floor in front of the princess's chair. Then we'll unfasten her seat belt and she can turn around and sit on the floor with her back against the pilot's compartment. Let me help, milady, said Tibbs, as he unfastened his belt and slid forward. The rest of you had better do the same thing, said Brown. Unfasten your belts and sit on the floor with your backs against the seat in front of you. With some difficulty and much sobbing on her part, the Princess Sporove was finally arranged in a more comfortable position, and the others, following Brown's suggestion, disposed themselves as best they could for the wait, long or short, until the storm should subside. Tarzan and the Waziri hunched in what meager protection they could find until the storm should abate, for, in its fury, it was a force against which it were foolish for man to pit himself unless the need were great. For a while Tarzan had heard the roar of the ship's motor, even above the storm. It had been evident to him that the ship was circling, and then gradually the sound had diminished and quickly faded into nothingness. Bwana, said Muviro, were there men up there above the storm? Yes, at least one, replied the ape-man, above it or in it. In either event, I should not care to be in his place. The forest stretches many marches in all directions. If he were looking for a place to land, I do not know where he would find it. It is well to be on the ground, said Muviro. I do not think that the gods intended that men should fly like birds. If they had, they would have given them wings. Little Nkima cuddled close to his master. He was drenched and cold and miserable. The world looked very black to Nkima, and there was no future. He was quite sure that it would always be dark, but he was not resigned to his fate. He was merely too crushed and unhappy to complain. But presently it commenced to get lighter. The wind passed on with a last, dismal wail. The sun burst forth, and the crushed jungle arose once more to its full life. The ape-man arose and shook himself, like a great lion. I shall start now for Ukena, he said, and talk with the Bukina. This time, perhaps, they will tell me where the Kaviru dwell. There are ways of making them talk, said Muviro. Yes, said Tarzan, there are ways. And we will follow on to Ukena, said Muviro. If you do not find me there, you will know that I am searching for the Kaviru and Bwaira. If I need you, I will send Nkima back to guide you to me. Without further words, without useless goodbyes and godspeeds, Tarzan swung into the dripping trees and disappeared toward the west. Strange stories had come from the Bukina, and filtered by word of mouth through 100 tribes to Waziri, the land of the Waziri. They were tales of the Kaviru, tales of a savage, mysterious people, whom no man saw, or seeing, lived to tell. They were demons with horns and tails. Or again, they were a race of men without heads. But the most common report was that they were a race of savage whites, who had reverted to barbarism and went naked in their hidden fastness. One story had it that they were all women, and another that they were all men. But Tarzan knew the distortion that was the fruit of many tongues, and gave little heed to things he heard, only the things that he had seen with his own eyes was he sure of. He knew that many tribes stole women, but oftentimes these women were seen again. Yet the women that the Kaviru stole were not, and so he was willing to admit that there was some tribe dwelling in a remote fastness that specialized in the stealing of young girls. But many of the other stories he heard, he did not believe. For instance, there was the fable of the longevity and perpetual youth of the Kaviru. That, Tarzan did not believe, although he knew that there were many strange and unbelievable happenings in the depths of the dark continent. It was a long trek, even for Tarzan, back to the country of the Bukina. The forest was soggy and dripping, the jungle steamed. But of such things and their attendant discomfort, the ape-man took small note. From birth he had become inured to discomfort, for the jungle is not a comfortable place. Cold, heat, danger were as natural to him as warmth and comfort and safety are to you. As you take the one, he took the other, as a matter of course. Even in infancy, he had never whined because he was uncomfortable, nor did he ever complain. If he could better conditions, he did so; if he could not, he ignored them. Just before dark, Tarzan made a kill, and the fresh meat warmed him and gave him new life, but that night he slept cold and uncomfortable in the dank and soggy forest. Before dawn he was astir again, eating once more of his kill. Then he swung off swiftly upon his journey, until the good red blood flowed hot through his veins, bringing warmth and a sense of well-being. But Nkima was miserable. He had wanted to go home, and now he was going back into a strange country that he did not like. He scolded and fretted a great deal, but when the sun came out and warmed him, he felt better, and then he scampered through the trees, looking for whom he might insult. On the morning of the third day, Tarzan came to the kraal of Udalo, chief of the Bukina. The sight of the tall, bronzed white, with the little monkey perched upon his shoulder, striding through the gate into the village, brought a horde of blacks jabbering and chattering about him. He was no stranger to them, for he had been there a short time before, and so they were not afraid of him. They were a little awed, however, for tales of the mighty ape-man had reached them even over the great distance that separated Ukena from the land of the Waziri. Paying no more attention to them than he would have to a herd of wildebeest, Tarzan strode straight to the hut of Udalo, the chief, where he found the old man squatting beneath the shade of a tree, talking with some of the elders of the tribe. Udalo had been watching the approach of the ape-man along the village street. He did not seem overly pleased to see him. "We thought the big bwana had gone away, and that he would not return," said the chief, "but now he is back." "Why?" "He has come to make talk with Udalo." "He has made talk with Udalo before. Udalo has told him all that he knows. This time Udalo is going to tell him more. He is going to tell him where lies the country of the Kaviru." The old man fidgeted. "Udalo does not know. Udalo does not talk true words. He has lived here all his life. The young girls of his tribe have been stolen by the Kaviru. Everyone knows that. Udalo is not such a fool that he does not know where these young girls are taken. He is afraid of what the Kaviru will do to him if he leads people to their kraal. But he need not be afraid. The Kaviru need not know how Tarzan finds them." "Why do you want to go to the kraal of the Kaviru? They are bad people." "I will tell you," said Tarzan. "Bwaira, the daughter of Muviro, the hereditary chief of the Waziri, has disappeared. Muviro thinks that the Kaviru took her. That is why Tarzan, who is war chief of the Waziri, must find the kraal of the Kaviru." "I do not know where it is," insisted Udalo, sullenly. As they talked, warriors had been approaching from all parts of the village, until now Tarzan and the chief had been surrounded by scowling, silent spearmen. Udalo appeared ill at ease, his eyes shifted restlessly. The whole atmosphere seemed surcharged with suspicion and danger. Even little Nkima sensed it. He trembled as he clung tightly to Tarzan. "What is the meaning of this, Udalo?" demanded the ape-man, indicating the surrounding warriors, with a nod. "I came in peace, to talk to you as a brother." Udalo cleared his throat nervously. "Since you were here and went away, there has been much talk. Our people remembered the stories they had heard about the Kaviru. It is said that they are white men who go naked, even as you. We do not know anything about you, you are a stranger. Many of my people think that you are Kavaru, that you have come to spy upon us and select young girls to steal from us. That is foolish talk, Udalo, said Tarzan. My people do not think it is foolish talk, growled the chief. You have come to the kraal of Udalo once too often. He rose slowly to his feet. You shall not steal any more of our young girls. And with that, he slapped his palms sharply together, and instantly the surrounding warriors leaped upon the ape-man. 5. The lion is coming. I can't stand it any longer, said the princess. I mean, this cramped position is killing me, and it is cold in here. I am nearly frozen. What right have you got to whine? Growled Alexis. You got us into this, you and your aviator. He spat the last word out contemptuously. Listen, Prince, said Jane, you and the rest of us can thank Brown's cool head and efficiency for the fact that we are alive and uninjured. It is little short of a miracle that none of us is hurt. I'll venture to say that there's not one pilot in 1,000 who could set this ship down as he did. I beg your pardon, said Tibbs, if I may say so, it has stopped raining. And there's the sun, cried Annette, excitedly. Making her way to the door, Jane opened it and looked down. We are only 50 feet from the ground, she said, but we may have a little difficulty getting down, that is, some of us may. What in the world are you doing, my dear? Demanded the princess, as Jane commenced to take off her shoes and stockings. I am going to have a look around. I want to see if I can get at the baggage compartment. We are going to need some of the stuff in there. I'm afraid we are going to find it mighty uncomfortable on the ground. It may be cold in here, but it will be cold and wet both, down there. We might make a fire, madam, if I might be so bold as to suggest it, offered Tibbs. Everything is rather wet and soggy, but perhaps we can manage it. It's too bad we haven't gasoline left. That would help a lot. There'll be some in the sump in the bottom of the tank, said Brown. But why are you taking off your shoes and stockings? Asked the princess. It's the only safe way to climb around in trees, Kitty. But my dear, I mean, after all, you don't intend to climb around in that tree. Precisely, and that is what you will have to do, too, if you ever want to get down from here. Oh, but my dear, I couldn't. I positively couldn't do it. We'll help you when the time comes, and see that you don't fall, and while I am looking around, Brown, I wish you and Tibbs would remove all the safety belts and fasten them together into one long strap. It may be necessary to lower the princess to the ground, and a strap will come in handy in getting the luggage down safely. You better let me go out and look around, miss, said Brown, you might fall. Jane smiled. I am used to it, Brown, she said. You'd probably be in far more danger than I. And then she stepped out onto the crumpled wing and leaped lightly to a nearby branch. Great Scott, look out, miss, you'll fall, shouted Brown. Be careful, madam. You'll kill yourself. Tibbs almost showed emotion. My dear, I mean, come back, wailed the princess. Annette screamed and covered her eyes with her palms. My dear lady, come back. For my sake, come back, begged Alexis. But Jane paid no attention to them, as she took 2 short steps along the branch that brought her within reach of the baggage compartment. It was not locked, and she quickly opened the door. "Whu," she exclaimed. What a mess. There's a broken branch rammed right up through here. It's a good thing for us it didn't come through the cabin. Is everything ruined? Asked Alexis. Oh, my no, some of the things must be damaged, but I imagine we can salvage nearly everything, and one of the first things I want to salvage is a pair of shorts. Skirts are bad enough at any time, but in a treetop they are a calamity. What luck! Here is my bag right in front. I won't be but a jiffy, and after I've changed I'll be able to accomplish something. She opened her bag and selected 2 or 3 garments. Then she swung lightly to a lower branch and disappeared from their view beneath the ship. "Say," exclaimed Brown, admiringly. "She's as much at home in the trees as a monkey. I never saw anything like it." Alexis clambered to a point from which he could look out of the door. Brown and Tibbs were removing the safety belts and fastening them together. Alexis looked down and shuddered. "It must be 100 feet to the ground," he said. "I don't see how we are ever going to make it, and those branches are wet and slippery." "Take off your shoes and stockings like she did," advised Brown. "I'm no monkey." "No?" "If I might venture to suggest it, sir, we could fasten the strap around you and lower you." "It will hold 1,000 pounds, said Brown. "It's tested for that." "It'll sure hold you, but you'd better leave your title behind, that's the heaviest part of you." "I've stood about enough of your impertinence, fellow," snapped Alexis. "Another word like that from you and I'll. "You'll what?" demanded Brown. "You and who else?" "I wish you two would quit quarreling," said the princess. "I mean, aren't things bad enough as they are without that?" "My dear, I do not quarrel with servants," said Alexis, haughtily. "In the first place," said Brown, "I ain't no servant, and in the second place, you'd better not quarrel if you know what's good for you. There's nothing I'd like better than an excuse to smack you on the beezer. If you ever dare lay hands on me, I'll—" "What?" "Fire me again," exclaimed Brown. "Now I'll just naturally have to paste you one to learn you your place, then maybe you'll remember that you ain't nothing but a worm, and that if you had a title a block long you'd still be a worm." "Don't you dare strike me," cried the prince, shrinking back. "What is the meaning of all this?" Jane stepped lightly into the doorway of the cabin. "I thought I told you two to stop quarreling. Now before we go any further, I want to tell you something. We're stranded here, the Lord only knows where. There may not be a white man within hundreds of miles. We shall have to depend solely upon our own resources. Quarreling and bickering among ourselves won't get us anywhere, it will just make our plight all the worse. One of us has got to take charge. It should be a man, and the only man here having any jungle experience, insofar as I know, or who is capable of commanding, is Brown. But there's too much friction between him and the prince, so Brown is out of the question." "I will take full charge," said Alexis. "The heck you will," exclaimed Brown. "My rank entitles me to the post," insisted Alexis, haughtily. "You said it," jibed Brown. "Your rank all right." "No, Alexis, you're out, too," said Jane. "We've got to have someone whom all will obey." "That just leaves Tibbs, then," said Brown. "Tibbs will suit me all right." "Oh, dear me, no," cried Tibbs. "Really, if you'll permit me, I couldn't think of assuming so much authority. Well, you know, I haven't been accustomed to it, madam." He turned piteously to Jane. "But you, madam, I am sure that we would all be extraordinarily proud to have you for our leader." "That is what I was going to suggest," said Jane. "I know the jungle better than any of you, and I am sure there isn't anyone else we could all agree on." "But it's our expedition," objected Alexis. "We paid for everything, we own the ship and all the supplies. I am the one who should command. Isn't that right, my dear?" He turned to his wife. "Oh, really, my dear, I mean, I don't know. Since you said those horrid things to me, I am crushed. My world has collapsed around my ears." "Well," said Brown, "there's no use chewing the fat any more about that. Lady Greystoke is boss from now on, and if there's anybody that don't like it, I'll attend to them." The Princess Sporove was slumped dejectedly on the floor of the ship, her handkerchief pressed to her eyes. "It doesn't make any difference to me," she said. "I don't care what happens now. I don't care if I die, I hope I do." As she finished, she glanced up, presumably to note the effect of her words upon her listeners, and for the first time since Jane had returned to the ship she saw her. "Oh, my dear," she exclaimed, "what a cute outfit. I mean, it's perfectly ducky." "Thanks," said Jane, "I'm glad you like it, it's practical, at least." She was wearing shorts, and a leather jacket. Her legs and feet were bare. A figured red scarf, wrapped once around her head, confined her hair and served the purposes of a hat. "But, my dear, won't you freeze to death?" demanded the princess. "Well," laughed Jane, "I won't exactly freeze to death, but I shall probably be cold lots of times. One gets used to being either too hot or too cold in the jungle. Now I am going down to look around for a suitable camping place, and you'd all better pray that there's one close by. While I am gone, Brown, you and Tibbs lower the luggage to the ground. Alexis, you go below and receive it. There's got to be someone there to unfasten the strap each time." "Let Annette do it," growled Alexis. "What do you suppose we've got servants for?" "Each of us has got to do his share, Alexis," said Jane, quietly, "and there are certain things, the heavier and more dangerous work, that will naturally fall to the men. There are no servants and no masters among us now. The sooner we all realize that, the better off and the happier we are going to be." Alexis approached the door of the ship gingerly and looked down. "Let Brown go down," he said. "I'll help Tibbs lower the baggage to him." Then he glanced in the direction of the baggage compartment. "How could anyone get out there on that branch," he said, "and do anything? He'd fall and break his neck." "Ah, can the chatter and go on down, as Lady Greystoke told you to," said Brown. "Say the word, miss, and I'll toss him down." "No you won't, you don't dare touch me." "Then get on over the edge and start down." "I can't, I'd fall." "Put the strap around him, Brown," said Jane, "and you and Tibbs lower him to the ground. I'm going along now." And with that, she jumped lightly to a nearby branch and swung down through the leafy foliage toward the ground below. She breathed the odors of the steaming jungle with a keen delight. The restrictions of ordered society, the veneer of civilization, fell away, leaving her free, and she sensed this new freedom with a joy that she had not felt since she had left the jungle to return to London. Everything about her reminded her of Tarzan. She looked about her, listening intently. It seemed inevitable that at the next moment she would see a bronze giant swing down through the foliage to clasp her in his arms, and then, with a sigh and a rueful smile, she shook her head, knowing full well that Tarzan was probably hundreds of miles away, ignorant both of her whereabouts and her plight. It was possible that he might not even yet have received her cable, telling him that she was flying to Nairobi. When he did receive it and she did not come, how would he know where to search for her? They had flown blind for so long that even Brown had no idea how far off their course they had been, nor even the approximate location of their landing place. It seemed quite hopeless that they should expect outside help. Their only hope lay within themselves. Whatever their situation, she and Brown, she felt they might reasonably expect to pull through, that is, if they had been alone. But how about the others? Tibbs, she thought, might have possibilities of resourcefulness and endurance. She had her doubts about Alexis. Men of his stamp were oftentimes almost as helpless as women. Annette was young and strong, but temperamentally unfitted for the grim realities of the jungle against which they would have to pit themselves. Her efficiency and even her strength would be lessened by the constant terror in which she would exist. As for Kitty, Jane mentally threw up her hands, hopeless, absolutely hopeless, in the face of any hardship, emergency, or danger. Yes, she felt that she and Brown could pull through, but could they pull the others through? It went without saying that they would not desert them. Her mind partially occupied with these thoughts, she moved through the lower terrace of the jungle, for so thickly was the ground overgrown with underbrush that she had kept to the lower branches of the trees to make her progress easier. She did not go far in one direction, because she realized the difficulty of transporting their supplies for any great distance through the heavy undergrowth. Circling, she sought for an open space, however small, in which they might build a temporary camp, but the jungle appeared to become wilder and less penetrable. She had completed half the circle, and was on the side of the ship opposite that from which she had descended, when she came unexpectedly upon a game trail. Immediately her spirits rose, for now they were assured of comparatively easy going and the certainty, almost, that eventually they would find natives. Before returning to the ship, she followed the trail a short distance, when suddenly she came upon a small stream and, beside it, an opening in the underbrush, perhaps an acre in extent. Elated, she turned back toward the ship, following the trail to ascertain how close it ran to the point from which the baggage must be transported. As she turned, she heard a slight rustling in the undergrowth behind her, a sound which her trained ears detected quickly and almost identified. Yet she was not sure. Nevertheless, she increased her gait, taking quick glances ahead and upward that she might always have an avenue of escape located in the event of sudden necessity. The sound continued, a little behind her and paralleling the trail along which she moved. She could hear Brown and Alexis quarreling with one another and bickering over the handling of the baggage. Alexis was on the ground, and he seemed very close. Of course, she might be mistaken. The thing that she heard might not be what she feared it was, but perhaps it would be as well to warn Alexis before it was too late, and so she called to him. "What is it?" he demanded, sullenly. "You had better climb a tree, Alexis. I think a lion is following me. He is very close." "I can't climb a tree," shouted Alexis. "I can't move through this undergrowth. Help! Brown, help! Do something, somebody." "Lower the strap to him and pull him up," shouted Jane. "It may not be a lion, and he may not bother us if it is, but we'd better be on the safe side." "Hurry up with that strap, you fool," shrieked Alexis. "There ain't no hurry," Brown replied, tantalizingly, "at least, I ain't in no hurry. If you let that lion get me, it'll be murder." "Oh, I guess he can stand it," replied Brown. "Hurry up and lower that strap, you murderer." "Ain't I lowering it, as fast as I can?" "Oh, I can hear him now, he's right on top of me, he'll get me." "That is me you hear, Alexis," said Jane, reassuringly. "Well, what if he does get you?" demanded Brown. "Ain't a lion got to eat? In California they feed them animals that ain't no good, so what are you crabbing about?" "Hurry now, Brown," cried Jane. "The lion is coming, and he's coming fast." 6. The Ballot of Death. As the Bukina warriors closed in upon him, Tarzan stood with folded arms, ignoring them. He was surrounded by many spears, and he knew that at this instant, if he sought to escape or give battle, a dozen spear points would transfix him instantly. His one hope lay in gaining time, and he felt that he could accomplish this best by feigning indifference. "Kill the Kaviru," shouted a woman in rear of the warriors. "They stole my daughter." "And mine," screamed another. "Kill him! Kill him," urged others of the savage throng. A very old man, who had been squatting beside Udalo, leaped to his feet. "No! No!" he screamed. "Do not kill him. If he be a Kaviru, his people will come and punish us. They will kill many of us and take all of our girls." Instantly the blacks commenced arguing among themselves. Some insisted upon killing him, others wanted to take him prisoner, while others thought that he should be released to mollify the Kaviru. As they jabbered, the spearmen in the front rank relaxed their vigilance. Some of them turned around and sought to expound their views to those behind them, and in this circumstance Tarzan thought he saw his chance to escape. With the speed of Aore, the lightning, and the strength of Gorgo, the buffalo, he leaped upon a nearby warrior and holding him as a shield in front of him, charged through the human ring that surrounded him, turning constantly so that no weapon could be directed against him without endangering the life of the black. So quickly had he acted that the blacks were taken entirely off their guard, and he had won almost to the clear, where he might have made a quick run for the village gate, when something struck him heavily on the back of the head. When he regained consciousness, he found himself in the dark interior of an evil-smelling hut, his wrists and ankles securely bound. With the return of consciousness came recollection of what had transpired, and the ape-man could not restrain a slow smile, for it was evident to him that the faction that had been afraid to kill him was more powerful than that which would have taken his life. Once again luck was with him. For the time being, therefore, he was safe, and so he was certain of escape, for he was so constituted that while life remained in him, he could not conceive a permanent captivity, nor could anything for long shake his confidence in his ability to extricate himself from any predicament that might overtake him, for was he not Tarzan of the apes, lord of the jungle? Presently he commenced to test the bonds that secured his wrists and ankles. They were very strong and there were a great many strands, and soon he saw that it would be hopeless to attempt to liberate himself. There was nothing to do, therefore, but wait. Unlike an ordinary man, he did not waste time wondering what his fate would be. Instead, he composed himself as comfortably as he could and fell asleep. And while he slept, a council of warriors plotted in the council house with Udalo, the chief. It was they who were wondering what Tarzan's fate should be. The old man who had first warned them against killing their prisoner was still his stanchest defender. He was Gupingu, the witch doctor. He prophesied that dire calamity would befall them if they harmed this man who, he assured them, was a Kavuru. But there were others who spoke quite as insistently for death. If he is a Kavuru, said one of these, his people will come and punish us as soon as they find that we have attacked him and made him prisoner. If we kill him, he cannot go back to them and tell them, and the chances are that they will never know what became of him. Those are true words, said another, a dead Kavuru is better than a live one. Then Udalo spoke. It is not for one man to decide, he said. The talk of many men is better than the talk of one. On the ground beside him were two bowls. One contained kernels of corn and the other small, round pebbles. He passed one of these bowls to the warrior upon his right and one to him upon his left. Let each warrior take a kernel of corn and a pebble, just one of each, not more, he said. They passed the bowls from hand to hand about the circle, and each warrior took a kernel of corn and a pebble, and when the bowls were returned to Udalo, he set them down beside him and picked up a gourd with a small neck. We will pass this gourd around the circle, he said, and each man shall speak either with a kernel of corn or with a pebble for the life or the death of the stranger. If you wish him to live, put a kernel of corn in the gourd, if you wish him to die, put a pebble. In silence, the gourd was passed around the grim circle as savage eyes followed it from the tense, painted faces of the warriors. The dropping of the fateful ballots into the hollow gourd sounded distinctly in every part of the large council house. At last the gourd completed the circle and came back to Udalo. There were fully 100 warriors in the circle, and Udalo could not count to 100, but he had an equally certain way of determining the outcome of the voting even though he was unable to determine how many votes were cast upon each side. He emptied the contents of the gourd upon the ground in front of him. Then with one hand, he picked up a grain of corn and, simultaneously, with the other, a pebble, and placed each in its respective bowl, and this he continued to do as long as there were kernels of corn and pebbles to match one another. But this was not for long, for he soon ran out of corn, and even then there were 75 or 80 pebbles left, showing that only a few had voted to spare the life of the ape-man. Udalo looked up and around the table. The stranger dies, he said. A savage, sinister shout rose from the assembled warriors. Let us go and kill him now, said one, before the Kaviru can come and find him among us. No, said Udalo, tomorrow night he dies. Thus will the women have time to prepare a feast. Tomorrow night we shall eat and drink and dance, while we torture the Kaviru. Let him suffer as he has made us suffer when he stole our children. A roar of approval and satisfaction greeted this suggestion. The council was over. The warriors had returned to their huts. Fires were banked. Silence had fallen upon the village of the Bukina. Even the usually yapping curs were silent. The kraal was wrapped in slumber. From a hut near the chief's, a figure crept silently into the night. It paused in the shadow of the hut from which it had emerged and looked fearfully about. Nothing stirred, and silently as a ghostly shadow the figure crept along the village streets. Tarzan had been awakened by the savage cries from the council house, and he had lain sleepless for some time because of the discomfort of his bonds, but presently he dozed again. He was not yet fully asleep when something awakened him, a sound that you or I, with our dull ears, might not have heard, the sound of naked feet creeping slowly and stealthily toward the hut where he lay. Tarzan rolled over so that he could see the entrance to the butt, and presently it was filled by a shadowy form. Someone was entering. Was it the executioner coming to destroy him? 7. The Merry Company. Tichi Lion broke through the underbrush into the trail a short distance behind Jane. It was then that she called her warning to Alexis. At sight of Jane, the lion bared his fangs and growled. Then he came toward her at a trot, and as he did so the girl leaped for an overhanging branch. As she caught it, the lion charged. He leaped for her, and his raking talons barely missed her bare foot as she drew herself safely out of his reach. With a hideous growl, he turned and leaped again. The prince was only a short distance away, but he was hidden by the dense underbrush beneath the ship. The angry growl sounded very close. The man was paralyzed with terror. From her position on the branch of the tree, Jane could see him. You'd better get out of there, Alexis, she said, but don't make any noise. If he hears you, he'll come for you. He's terribly sore about something, must have missed his kill last night. Alexis tried to speak, but no sound came from his throat. He just stood there trembling, an ashen pallor on his face. Jane could not see Brown, but she knew that he was directly above Alexis. Brown, she called, drop the end of the strap to the prince. Fasten it around your body underneath your arms, Alexis, and Brown and Tibbs will pull you up. I'll try and keep Nkima's attention riveted on me. The lion was pacing back and forth beneath the tree, glaring hungrily up at the girl. Jane broke off a small, dead branch and threw it at the beast. It struck him in the face, and, with a roar, he leaped again for the branch on which Jane stood. In the meantime, Brown lowered the end of the strap quickly to Alexis. Hurry up, fasten it around you, he said. For Pete's sake, what's the matter with you? Get a move on. But Alexis just stood there trembling, his teeth chattering, and his knees knocking together. Alexis, snap out of it, cried Jane. You've got to get that belt fastened around you before the lion discovers you. Don't you understand? It's a matter of life and death with you. You poor sap, yelled Brown. Get a move on. With trembling hands, Alexis reached for the belt, and at the same time he seemed to find his voice and commenced to scream lustily for help. Keep still, warned Jane. The lion hears you. He is looking in your direction now. Hurry up, you dumb cluck, shouted Brown. The lion was tearing through the underbrush, searching for the author of these new sounds. Jane threw another branch at him, but it did not distract his attention. He only growled and started cautiously into the brush. With fumbling fingers, Alexis was tying the belt about his body. Hoist away, Brown, cried Jane, the lion is coming. Brown and Tibbs pulled away lustily, and Alexis rose out of the underbrush. The lion came steadily on. At last he was directly beneath the terrified man. Alexis, looking down straight into the cruel eyes of the carnivore, voiced a scream of horror. Slowly, a few inches at a time, Brown and Tibbs were raising Alexis out of harm's way, but still he was perilously close to the great beast. Then the lion reared up to its full height and struck at him. A raking talon touched the heel of the man's shoe, and, with a final scream, Alexis fainted. Brown and Tibbs redoubled their efforts. The lion dropped back to the ground, gathered himself and sprang. Again he missed, but only by inches, and before he could spring again, Alexis was safely out of his reach. The two men hoisted the limp body of Sporov to the ship, and with considerable difficulty dragged him into the cabin. At sight of him, the princess commenced to scream. "He's dead! He's dead! Oh, my darling, and your kitty was so cross to her ally." "For Pete's sake, shut up," snapped Brown. "My nerves are about shot, and anyway the sap isn't dead, he's just scared stiff." "Brown, how dare you speak to me like that?" cried the princess. "Oh, it's terrible, nobody knows what I'm suffering. I mean, no one understands me, everyone is against me." "Lord," cried Brown, "a little more of this and we'll all be nuts." "Excuse me, madam, but he seems to be coming to," said Tibbs. "I think he'll be all right in a minute, ma'am." "Do something, Annette," cried the princess. "What are you sitting there for, just like a bump on a log? I mean, where are the smelling salts? Get some water. Oh, isn't it terrible? Oh, darling, Ally, speak to your kitty." Alexis opened his eyes and looked about him. Then he closed them and shuddered. "I thought he had me," he said, in a trembling whisper. "No such luck," said Brown. "It was a very close call, sir, if I may make so bold as to say so, sir," said Tibbs. Jane stepped into the cabin doorway. "All right?" she asked. "From the noise you were making, Kitty, I thought something dreadful had happened." "The Lord only knows what would happen if something really should happen," said Brown, disgustedly. "I'm getting fed up on all this screaming and bellyaching. I never had no royalty in my hair before, but I sure got 'em now." Jane shook her head. "Be patient, Brown," she said. "Remember this is all new to them, and naturally anyway their nerves are on edge after all that we have passed through." "Well, ain't the rest of us got nerves, miss? Ain't we got a right to be upset, too? But you don't hear none of us bawling around like them. I suppose being royal gives 'em the right to be nuisances." "Never mind, now," said Jane, "you're getting as bad as the others, Brown. The thing that I am interested in just now is what we are going to do about that lion. He may hang around here for hours, and as long as he does, we're just blocked. He's in a nasty mood, and it won't be safe to go down there until we know that he has cleared out. The best thing for us to do is to kill him, as he may hang around this neighborhood waiting for a chance to get some of us. He's an old fellow, and because of that, he may be a man-eater. They get that way when they are too old to bag their regular prey." "A man-eater?" The Princess Sporov shuddered. "How horrible. I mean, how terribly horrible." "I think we can get rid of him," said Jane. "You brought rifles, of course, Alexis?" "Oh, yes, indeed, 2 of them, high-powered rifles, they'd stop an elephant." "Good," said Jane, "where are they?" "They're in the baggage compartment, miss, I'll get them," said Brown. "And bring some ammunition, too," said Jane. "Who's going down there to shoot the horrid thing?" demanded the princess. "I, of course," said Jane. "But, my dear," cried the princess, "I mean, you just couldn't." Brown returned with a rifle. I couldn't find no ammunition, miss, he said. Where is it packed, Sporove? What? Demanded the prince. The ammunition, snapped Brown. Oh, ammunition. Yes, ammunition, you. The prince cleared his throat. Well, you see, You mean you didn't bring any ammunition? Demanded Brown. Well, of all the. Never mind, said Jane. If there's no ammunition, there's no ammunition, and grousing about it isn't going to get us any. If I may be permitted, I think I can be of assistance, milady, said Tibbs, not without some show of pride. How is that, Tibbs? Asked Jane. I have a firearm in my bag, milady. I will kill the beast. That's fine, Tibbs, said Jane, please go and get it. As Tibbs was moving toward the doorway, he suddenly stopped. A flush slowly mantled his face, he appeared most uncomfortable. What's the matter, Tibbs? Asked Jane. I had forgotten, milady, he stammered, but my bag has already been lowered down there with the bloomin' lion. Jane could not repress a laugh. This is becoming a comedy of errors, she cried, rifles without ammunition, and our only firearm in possession of the enemy. Oh, my dear, what are we going to do? Demanded the princess. There's nothing to do until that brute goes away. It's almost too late now anyway to try to make camp, we'll simply have to make the best of it up here for the night. And so it was that a most unhappy and uncomfortable party shivered and grumbled through the long, dark night, a night made hideous by the roars of hunting lions and the shrill screams of stricken beasts. But at last day broke with that uncanny suddenness that is a phenomenon of equatorial regions. The moment that it was light enough, Jane was out reconnoitering. The lion was gone, and a survey of the surrounding country in the immediate vicinity of the ship, from the lower branches of the trees, revealed no sign of him or any other danger. I think we can go down now and start making camp, she said, after she had returned to the ship. Is most of the baggage down, Brown? All but a few pieces, miss, he replied. Well, get it down as rapidly as possible, and then we'll cut an opening to the trail, it is only a few yards. All right, miss, said Brown. Come on, Your Majesty, we'll lower you down to unhook the stuff at the other end. You won't lower me down, said Alexis. I wouldn't go down there alone again for all the baggage in the world. Brown looked at the man with disgust that he made no effort to conceal. All right, he said, you stay up here and help Tibbs, I'll go down and unfasten the stuff when you lower it to me. If you think I'm going to balance out there on that limb and unload the baggage compartment, you're mistaken, said the prince. It's absolutely out of the question, I get very dizzy in high places, and I should most certainly fall. Well, what are you going to do? Demanded Brown. Sit around here while the rest of us wait on you? That's what you servants were hired for, said Alexis. Oh, yeah? Well, I'll go down below, said Jane. Brown, you and Tibbs lower the stuff to me. Now let's get busy, and with that she turned and dropped down through the trees to the ground below. With a grunt of disgust, Brown climbed out on the limb that led to the baggage compartment, followed by Tibbs, and the two soon lowered away the remainder of the luggage. Now lower your passengers, called Jane, after Brown had told her that there was no more baggage. Alexis, you come first. Come on, Your Majesty, said Brown, you're going first. I told you that I wouldn't go down there alone, said the prince. Lower the others. All right, Your Majesty, but if you don't go now, you'll either climb down yourself or stay here till hell freezes over, for all I care. Come ahead, Annette, I guess you're the one to go first, and then we'll lower the old lady. Brown, how dare you refer to me so disrespectfully? It was the voice of the Princess Burroughs coming from the interior of the cabin. There's nothing wrong with her ears, said Brown, with a grin. I'm terribly afraid, Mr. Brown, said Annette. You needn't be, little one, he replied, we'll see that nothing happens to you. Come on, sit down in the doorway and I'll put this belt around you. You won't drop me. Not a chance, my dear. I might drop royalty, but not you. She flashed him a quick smile. You are so very nice, Mr. Brown, she said. You just finding that out? Well, come on, sister, climb out on this branch here. I'll help you. Steady, now sit down. Ready, Tibbs? Ready, sir, replied Tibbs. All right. Now down you go. Annette clutched her rosary, closed her eyes, and started praying, but before she realized it she had touched the ground and Jane was helping to remove the belt from about her. Now, princess, called Brown. Oh, I can't move, cried the princess. I'm paralyzed. I mean, I really am. Brown turned to Burroughs. Go in there, mister, and fork your old lady out, he snapped. We ain't got no time to fool around. Tell her if she don't come pronto, we'll leave you both up here. You unspeakable ruffian, sputtered the prince. Shut up, and go on and do what I tell you to, growled the pilot. Burroughs turned back to his wife and helped her to the door of the cabin, but one glance down was enough for her. She screamed and shrank back. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, said Brown. I can't. I mean, I just can't, Brown. Brown made his way to the cabin. He carried the end of a long strap with him. Come on, he said, let me get this around you. But I can't do it, I tell you. I mean, I shall die of fright. You won't die of nothing, half-witted people live forever. That will be enough out of you, Brown. I have endured all of your insults that I am going to. The princess bridled and attempted to look very dignified, in which, in her disheveled condition, she failed miserably. Brown had stooped and fastened the belt about her. Ready, Tibbs? He asked. Yes, sir. All ready, sir, replied the valet. Come on then, princess. Here, you, give me a lift. Shove on her from behind. Brown pulled from in front, and Alexis pushed from behind, and the Princess Burroughs shrieked and clawed at everything in sight in an attempt to get a hold that they could not break. What's the matter up there? Demanded Jane. Is anyone hurt? No, replied Brown. We're just moving the better half of the royal family. Now listen, princess, we're doing this for your own good. If you stays up here alone, you starves to death. Yes, go on, Kitty. You're delaying things, said Alexis. A lot you'd care if I were killed, Alexis. I suppose you'd be glad if I were dead, it's all that will you got me to make. I was a big fool to do it, but, believe me, I mean, just as soon as I find writing materials, I'm going to change it, after what you said to me and what you called me. I'll cut you off without a cent, Alexis, without a cent. The eyes of Prince Burroughs closed to two ugly slits. His brow contracted in a frown, but he made no reply. Brown took the princess's hands and held them away from the chair to which she had been clinging. There ain't no use, princess, he said, a little less harshly this time, for he saw that the woman was genuinely terrified. Tibbs and I'll see that you don't get hurt none. We'll lower you easy, and Lady Greystoke and Annette are down there to help you. Just get hold of yourself and show a little spunk for a minute and it will be over. Oh, I shall die, I know I shall die. Brown and Alexis lifted her out of the cabin onto the branch that passed close to the doorway. Slowly they eased her off it and then lowered her carefully to the ground. "Well, Tibbs," said Brown, "I guess you're next. Do you want to be lowered, or will you climb down?" "I shall climb down," replied Tibbs. "You and I can go together and perhaps help one another." "Hey, how about me?" demanded Sporove. "You climb, too, you louse, or you can stay up here," replied Brown, "and I don't mean maybe." 8. Ideni, the Kavuru. Framed in the small doorway of the hut and silhouetted against the lesser darkness beyond, Tarzan saw the figure of his stealthy nocturnal visitor and knew that it was a man. Helpless in his bonds, the Lord of the Jungle could only wait, for he could not defend himself. And though he chafed at the thought of giving up his life without an opportunity to defend it, he was still unmoved and unafraid. The figure crept closer, groping in the darkness, when suddenly Tarzan spoke. "Who are you?" he demanded. The creature sought to silence him with a sibilant hiss. "Not so loud," he cautioned. "I am Gupingu, the witch doctor." "What do you want?" "I have come to set you free. Go back to your people, Kavuru, and tell them that Gupingu saved you from death. Tell them that because of this, they must not harm Gupingu or take his daughters from him." Darkness hid the faint smile with which Tarzan received this charge. "You are a wise man, Gupingu," he said, "now cut my bonds." "One thing more," said Gupingu. "What is that?" "You must promise never to tell Udalo, or any of my people, that I freed you." "They will never know from me," replied the ape-man, "if you will tell me where your people think we Kavuru live." "You live to the north, beyond a barren country, by a high mountain that stands alone in the center of a plain," explained Gupingu. "Do your people know the trail to the Kavuru country?" "I know it," replied the witch doctor, "but I promise not to lead anyone there." "That is well if you know." "I do know," insisted Gupingu. "Tell me how you would reach this trail, then I shall know whether you know or not." "To the north of our kraal, leading to the north, is an old elephant trail. It winds much, but it leads always toward the country of the Kavuru. Much bamboo grows on the slopes of the mountain beside your village, and there the elephants have gone for years to feed on the young shoots." The witch doctor came closer and felt for the bonds around Tarzan's ankles. "After I have freed you," he said, "wait here until I have had time to return to my hut, then go silently to the gates of the village. There you will find a platform just inside the palisade from which the warriors shoot their arrows over the top when enemies attack us. From there you can easily climb over the top of the palisade, and drop to the ground on the outside." "Where are my weapons?" demanded Tarzan. "They are in the hut of Udalo, but you cannot get them. A warrior sleeps just inside the doorway. You would awaken him if you tried to enter." "Cut my bonds," said the ape-man. With his knife, Gupingu severed the thongs about the prisoner's ankles and wrists. "Wait now, until I have reached my hut," he said, and turning, crawled silently through the doorway. The ape-man stood up and shook himself. He rubbed his wrists and then his ankles to restore circulation. As he waited for Gupingu to reach his hut, he considered the possibility of regaining his weapons. Presently, dropping to his knees, he crawled from the hut, and when he stood erect again upon the outside, he drew a deep breath. It was good to be free. On silent feet he moved down the village street. Other than in silence, he sought no concealment, for he knew that even if he were discovered they could not take him again before he could reach the palisade and scale it. As he approached the chief's hut, he paused. The temptation was very great, for it takes time and labor to produce weapons, and there were his own only a few paces from him. He saw a faint light illuminating the interior of the hut, a very faint light from the embers of a dying fire. He approached the entrance, which was much larger than those of the other huts, and just inside and across the threshold he saw the figure of a sleeping warrior. Tarzan stooped and looked into the interior. His quick, keen eyes, accustomed to darkness, discovered much more than might yours or mine, and one of the first things that they discovered were his weapons lying near the fire beyond the body of the warrior. The throat of the sleeping man lay bare and fully exposed. It would have been the work of but a moment for the steel-thewed fingers of the ape-man to have throttled life from that unconscious figure. Tarzan considered the possibilities of this plan, but he discarded it for two reasons. One was that he never chose to kill wantonly, and the other, and probably the dominating reason, was that he was sure that the man would struggle even if he could not cry out, and that his struggles would awaken the sleepers inside the hut, an event which would preclude the possibility of Tarzan retrieving his weapons. So he decided upon another and even more dangerous plan. Stooping and moving cautiously, he stepped over the body of the warrior. He made no sound, and the 2 steps took him to his weapons. First of all, he retrieved his precious knife, which he slipped into the sheath at his hip. Then he adjusted the quiver of arrows behind his right shoulder and looped his rope across his left. Gathering his short spear and bow in one hand, he turned again toward the entrance, after a hasty glance around the interior of the hut to assure himself that its occupants were all asleep. At that instant, the warrior rolled over and opened his eyes. At the sight of a man standing between himself and the fire, he sat up. In the gloom of the interior, it was impossible for him to know that this was an enemy, and the natural assumption was that one of the inmates of the hut was moving about in the night. Yet the figure did not seem familiar, and the warrior was puzzled. "Who's that?" he demanded. "What's the matter?" Tarzan took a step nearer the man. "Silence," he whispered. "One sound and you die. I am the Kaviru." The black's lower jaw dropped, his eyes went wide. Even in the semi-darkness, Tarzan could see him tremble. "Go outside," directed the ape-man, "and I will not harm you, and go quietly." Shaking like a leaf, the warrior did as he was bid, and Tarzan followed him. He made the warrior accompany him to the gates and open them, then he passed out of the village of Udalo into the black jungle night. A moment later he heard the shouts of the warrior as he aroused the village, but Tarzan knew that there would be no pursuit. They would not dare follow a Kaviru into the night. For an hour Tarzan followed the trail toward the north in accordance with Gupingu's directions. All about him were the noises of the jungle night, stealthy movements in the underbrush, the sound of padded feet, the coughing grunts of a nearby lion, the roar of a distant one, but his sensitive ears and nostrils told him where danger lurked, so that he was always alert to avoid it. He was moving upwind, and presently he caught the scent of a lion that had not fed a hunting lion, a hungry lion, and Tarzan took to the trees. A short search revealed a comfortable resting place, and here he lay up for the remainder of the night. Wondering what had become of Nkima, whom he had not seen since he was captured, he fell asleep, soothed by the familiar jungle sounds. With the coming of dawn, he moved on again toward the north, and back in the village of Udalo, little Nkima cowered among the branches of the tree above the chief's hut. He was a most unhappy little monkey, a very frightened little monkey. During the night the blacks had run from their huts shouting and jabbering. That had awakened Nkima, but he had not known the cause of it. He did not know that it meant that his master had escaped from the village. He thought he was still lying in the hut where he had seen the Bukina take him. When Nkima awoke again, dawn was dispelling the darkness. Below him, the village streets were deserted. He heard no sound of life from any hut. He looked down upon the one to which they had dragged his master, and, summoning all his courage, he dropped quickly to the ground and scampered along the village street to the entrance to this hut. A woman, coming from her hut to start her cooking fire, saw the little monkey and tried to catch him, but he escaped her and, racing across the village, scaled the palisade. Not daring to enter the village again, and terrified at the thought of being alone in this strange country, Nkima fled through the jungle in the direction of home. And so Nkima went his way not knowing that his master had escaped. All day Tarzan made his way north along the winding elephant trail. It was not until late in the afternoon that he was able to make a kill, and then after feeding he lay up once more for the night. In the afternoon of the second day the nature of the country changed. The jungle became more open and there were park-like places where there was little or no underbrush and the trees grew farther apart. It was a country entirely new to Tarzan, and as such whetted his imagination and aroused within him the instinct of exploration which had always been a powerful factor in affecting his destiny, for he had that intelligent inquisitiveness which set him above the other beasts of the jungle. As he moved silently along his way, constantly on the alert, a vagrant breeze carried to his nostrils a strange scent that brought him to a halt. For a moment he stood in statuesque pose, every faculty alert. Tarzan was puzzled. The scent was that of a tumangani, and yet there was a difference. It was an odor entirely new to him, and then, mingling with it, but fainter, came the familiar scent spoor of Nkima, the lion. Those two in proximity often meant trouble, and while Tarzan was not particularly interested in saving the man from the lion, or the lion from the man, whichever was hunting the other, natural curiosity prompted him to investigate. The trees ahead of him grew sufficiently close together so that he could move through their branches, and this he elected to do, since always it gave him an advantage to come from above upon those he sought, especially where, in the case of men, they would not be expecting him. The perception of the eyes of man is normally in a horizontal plane, while those of the cat family, with their vertical pupils, detect things above them far more quickly than would a man. Perhaps this is because for ages the cat family has hunted its prey in trees, and even though the lion no longer does so, he still has the eyes of his smaller progenitors. As Tarzan swung in the direction of the strange scent spoor, he was aware that the odor of the lion was becoming stronger much more rapidly than the other scent, a fact which convinced him that the lion was approaching the man, though whether by accident or intent he could not of course determine. But the fact that the lion scent was that of a hungry lion led him to believe that the beast was stalking the man. Any beast with a full belly gives off a different odor from one that is empty, and as an empty stomach is always a hungry one, and as hungry lions are hunting lions, to Tarzan's mind it was a foregone conclusion that the man was the quarry and the lion the hunter. Tarzan came in sight of the man first, and the initial glimpse brought the lord of the jungle to a sudden stop. Here, indeed, was a white man, but how different from any white man that Tarzan had seen before. The fellow was clothed only in a loincloth that appeared to be made of gorilla hide. His ankles and wrists and arms were loaded with bracelets, a many-stranded necklace of human teeth fell across his breast. A slender cylinder of bone or ivory ran transversely through the pierced septum of his nose, his ears were ornamented with heavy rings. Except for a manet of hair from his forehead to the nape of his neck, his skull was shaved, and in this manet were fastened gay feathers which floated above a face hideously painted, and yet, with all these earmarks of the savage Negro, the man was undoubtedly white, even though his skin was bronzed by much exposure to the weather. He was sitting on the ground with his back against a tree, eating something from a skin bag fastened to the string that supported his loincloth, and it was apparent that he was absolutely unaware of the proximity of the lion. Cautiously, silently, Tarzan moved nearer until he was in the tree directly above the unconscious man. As he examined him more closely, he recalled the many fables concerning the Kaviru, and especially the one which described them as white savages. This stranger, then, might be a Kaviru. It seemed reasonable to assume that he was, but further speculation on this subject was interrupted by a low snarl a short distance away. Instantly the savage white was on his feet. In one hand he grasped a heavy spear, in the other a crude knife. The lion burst from the underbrush at full charge. He was so close that the man had no chance to seek safety in the tree above him. All that he could do, he did. Swiftly his spear hand flew back, and in the next lightning move he launched the heavy weapon. Perhaps the suddenness of this unexpected attack had momentarily unnerved him, for he made a clean miss, and simultaneously Tarzan leaped for the carnivore from a branch above the two. He struck the lion at the shoulder diagonally from above just as he reared upon his hind legs to seize his victim. The impact of the ape-man's body toppled the lion upon its side. With a frightful roar, it regained its feet, but not before the ape-man had locked his powerful legs around the small of its body and encircled its massive throat with one great arm. As the two beasts fought, the white savage stood an awestruck witness to the strange duel. He heard the growls and roars of the man mingle with those of the lion. He saw them roll upon the ground together as lashing talons sought to reach the bronzed hide of the man-thing, and then he saw the knife hand rise and fall, and each time it drove the blade deep into the side of the king of beasts, until at last the roaring ceased and the tawny body collapsed in the final spasm of death. The ape-man leaped erect. He placed a foot upon the carcass of his foe and raising his face to the sky voiced the kill cry of the victorious bull ape. At that weird and hideous call, the white savage shrank back and clutched the hilt of his knife more tightly. As the last weird note died away in the distance, Tarzan turned and faced the creature whose life he had saved. The two stood appraising each other in silence for a moment, then the savage spoke. "Who are you?" he demanded, in the same dialect that the buccaneer used. "I am Tarzan of the Apes," replied the ape-man. "And you?" "I am Ideni, the Kavuru." Tarzan experienced that sense of satisfaction which one feels when events bear out his judgment. This was, indeed, a bit of good fortune, for now he would at least know what sort of people the Kavuru were. Perhaps this fellow would even guide him to the country he sought. "But why did you kill the lion?" asked Ideni. "If I had not, he would have killed you." "Why should you care if he killed me? Am I not a stranger?" The ape-man shrugged. "Perhaps it was because you are a white man," he said. Ideni shook his head. "I do not understand you. I've never seen anyone like you before. You are not a black, you are not a Kavuru. What are you?" "I am Tarzan," replied the ape-man. "I am looking for the village of the Kavuru, now you can take me there. I wish to speak with your chief." Ideni scowled and shook his head. "No one comes to the village of the Kavuru," he said, "other than those who come there to die. Because you have saved my life, I will not take you there, nor will I kill you now, as I should. Go your way, Tarzan, and see that it does not lead you to the village of the Kavuru." 9. Shieta, the leopard. With the aeroplane party safely deposited on the ground, Brown cut a narrow path to the trail, using a small hand axe that fortunately had been included in the heterogeneous and generally quite useless impedimenta that the Prince and Princess Sporov had thought essential to the success of their expedition. Tibbs had offered to help cut trail, but a lifetime of valeting had not fitted him for anything so practical as wielding a hand axe. He meant well, but he could hit nothing that he aimed at, and for fear that he might commit mayhem or suicide, Brown took the implement from him. Sporov did not offer to help, and Brown ignored him entirely, knowing that he would prove less efficient, if possible, than Tibbs. But when it came to transporting the baggage, the pilot insisted that the prince do his share. "You may be the scion of a long line of cab drivers," he said, "but you are going to work or get a punch on the nose." Sporov grumbled, but he worked. After the luggage had been transported to the little clearing beside the stream that Jane had found, she directed the building of a boma and some rude shelters. In this, the brunt of the work fell on Brown and Jane, though Annette and Tibbs assisted to the best of their ability. No one expected Kitty Sporov to do anything but moan, and she didn't. Alexis was assigned to the building of the boma after someone else had cut the brush, a job that was far beyond either his physical or mental attainments. "I can't see how guys like him ever live to grow up," grumbled Brown, "nor what good they are after they do grow up. I never seen such a total loss before in my life." Jane laughed. "He dances divinely, Brown," she said. I'll bet he does, replied the pilot. Damned gigolo, bringing along just a dinky little hand axe and rifles without any ammunition. He spat the words out disgustedly. And look at all this here junk. Maybe there's something in it, we ought to take an inventory and see what we got. That's not a bad idea, said Jane. Oh, by the way, Tibbs, where's that gun of yours? We really should have it handy. Yes, milady, right away, said Tibbs. I never travel without it, one can never tell when one is going to need it, and especially in Africa with all these lions and things. He located his bag, rummaged through it, and finally located his weapon, which he withdrew gingerly and exhibited not without considerable pride, holding it up where all might see it. There she is, milady, he said, and rather a beauty I fancy, too. Jane's heart sank as she looked at the little single-shot .22 short pistol that Tibbs dangled before her so proudly. Brown burst into a loud laugh. Say, he said, if the Germans had known you had that, there wouldn't have been no World War. Beg pardon, Mr. Brown, said Tibbs, stiffly, it is really a very fine weapon. The man I got it from said so himself. It stood me back 7 bob, sir. Let me see it, said Brown. Taking the pistol he opened the breech. Tinety loaded, he said, and it wouldn't be no good if it was. Bless me, no, exclaimed Tibbs, I wouldn't think of carrying a loaded weapon, sir, it's too dangerous. One never knows when it might go off. Well, said Jane, it may come in handy shooting small game. Got plenty of ammunition for it. Well, milady, stammered Tibbs, you see I've always been intending to buy ammunition for it, but I never got around to it. Brown looked at the Englishman in pitying astonishment. Well, I'll be. Jane sat down on an appended suitcase and burst into laughter. Forgive me, Tibbs, but really it's too funny, she cried. I'll tell you what we'll do, said Brown. We'll put Tibbs on guard tonight, and if he sees a lion he can throw that thing at him. It ain't any good for nothing else. I don't see how you can laugh, Jane, said Kitty. Suppose a lion should come. Tibbs, you should have brought ammunition. It is very careless of you. It doesn't make any difference, Kitty, for as far as a lion is concerned, that pistol is just as effective empty as it would be loaded. I know we are all going to be killed, moaned Kitty. I wish I were back in the ship, it's much safer there. Don't worry, said Jane, the boma will be some protection, and we will keep a fire going all night. Most beasts are afraid of a fire, they won't come near one. Late in the afternoon, a shelter had been completed with 2 compartments, one for the women and one for the men. It was a very crude affair, but it provided some shelter from the elements, and it induced a feeling of security far greater than it warranted, for it is a fact that if we can hide in something, however flimsy, we feel much safer than we do in the open. While the shelters and boma were being built, Jane busied herself with another activity. Kitty had been watching her for some time, and finally her curiosity got the best of her. What in the world are you doing, dear? She asked, as she watched Jane shaping a small branch with the hand axe. I am making weapons, a bow and arrows, and a spear. Oh, how perfectly isn't it ducky? It's just like you, my dear, to think of archery, it will help us to pass the time away. What I am making will help us obtain food and defend ourselves, replied Jane. Oh, of course, exclaimed Kitty, how perfectly silly of me, but when I think of archery I always think of little arrows sticking in the straw target. They are so colourful, my dear, the way they are painted. I recall such beautiful pictures of young people in sport clothes, of green turfs, and sunshine against a background of lovely trees. But who do you suppose ever thought of using bows and arrows to hunt game? I'm sure it must be original with you, my dear, but it's very clever of you, if you can hit anything. Toward the middle of the afternoon, Jane had completed a very crude bow and half a dozen arrows, the tips of which she had fire-hardened. Her work completed, she stood up and surveyed the camp. "You are getting along splendidly," she said. "I'm going out to see what I can rustle for supper. Have you a knife, Brown?" "I may need one." "But, my dear, I mean you're not going out there alone," cried Kitty. "Sure she's not," said Brown. "I'll go along with you, miss." "I'm afraid," said Jane, with a smile, "that where I am going, you couldn't follow. Here, let me have your knife." "I reckon I can go anywhere you can go, miss," said Brown, grinning. "Let me have the knife," said Jane. "Why, it's a nice big one. I always did like to see a man carrying a man-sized knife." "Well, if we are ready," said Brown, "let's start." Jane shook her head. "I told you, you couldn't follow me," she said. "Want to lay a little bet on that?" "Sure," said Jane. "I'll bet you £1 against this knife that you can't keep up with me for 100 yards. "I'll just take you up on that, miss," said Brown. "Let's get going." "Come ahead, then," said Jane. And with that, she ran lightly across the clearing, leaped for a low-hanging branch and swinging herself into the trees was out of sight in an instant. Brown ran after her, seeking to catch a glimpse of her from the ground, but he was soon floundering in heavy undergrowth. It didn't take him long to realize that he was beaten, and rather crestfallen he returned to the camp. "Gracious," exclaimed the princess. "Did you ever see anything like it? It was perfectly wonderful. I mean, it really was, but I am so afraid something will happen to her out there alone. Alexis, you should not have permitted it." "I thought Brown was going with her," said Alexis. "If I had known that he was afraid, I would have gone myself." Brown eyed Alexis with contempt too deep for words as he returned to his work on the shelter. "I should think anyone would be afraid to go out there," said Annette, who was helping Brown thatch the roof with large leaves. "Lady Greystoke must be so very brave." "She's sure got guts," said Brown, "and did you see the way she took to them trees? Just like a monkey." "Just as though she had lived in them all her life," said Annette. "Do you really think she can kill anything with her bow and arrows?" asked Tibbs. "They look so, are inadequate, if I may make so bold as to say so." "Say," said Brown, "she's not the kind that would go out there if she didn't know what she was doing. I thought all the time, until just before we crashed, that she was another one of them silly society dames that had never had anything in her noodle heavier than champagne bubbles, but believe me, I take my hat off to her now, and you can believe me, when I take orders from a dame she's got to be some dame." "Lady Greystoke is a very remarkable woman," said Alexis, "and a very beautiful one. Kindly remember also, Brown, that she is a lady, a member of the English nobility. My man, I resent the lack of deference you show by referring to her as a dame, and saying that she has guts. I know you Americans are notoriously ill-bred, but there is a limit to what I can stand from you." "Yeah," inquired Brown, "and what are you going to do about it, you damned pansy?" "Alexis, you forget yourself," said the princess. "You should not stoop to quarrel with an employee." "You're darn tootin', lady," said Brown. "He better not stoop to quarrel with this bozo. I'm just laying for an excuse to push in his mush." Annette laid a hand upon Brown's arm. "Please, Mr. Brown," she said, "do not quarrel. Is it not bad enough as it is, that we should make it worse by always quarreling among ourselves?" Brown turned and looked at her quizzically, then he covered her little hand with his. "I guess you're right, girlie, at that. I'll lay off him, if he'll lay off me." He closed his hand on hers. "I guess you and me's going to hit it off, okay, kid?" "Hit what off, Mr. Brown?" "I mean, we're going to be pals," he exclaimed. "Pals? What are they?" "Buddies, friends. I thought you saved English." Oh, friends, yes, I understand that. I should like to be friends with Mr. Brown. Annette likes to be friends with everyone. That's all right, baby, but don't be too promiscuous, for I have a feeling that I'm going to like you a lot. The French girl cast her eyes down coquettishly. I think, Mr. Brown, we had better get along with our work, or we shall have only half a roof over our heads tonight. Okay, kiddo, but we'll talk about this friendship business later. There ought to be a full moon tonight. After she left the camp, Jane moved rapidly and silently through the trees paralleling the little stream which she tried to keep in view while she searched for a place where the signs indicated the beasts were accustomed to come to drink. A light breeze was blowing in her face, bringing faintly various scent spores to her nostrils, which, while not as sensitive as those of her mate, were nevertheless far more sensitive than those of an ordinary civilized person. Jane had learned long ago that senses may be developed by training, and she had let no opportunity pass to train hers to the fullest of her ability. Now, very faintly, she caught the suggestion of a scent that set her nerves to tingling with that thrill which only the huntsman knows. Quarry lay ahead. The girl moved even more cautiously than before, scarcely a leaf stirred to her passage, and presently she saw ahead that which she sought, a small, harnessed antelope, a bushbuck, which was moving daintily along the trail just ahead of her. Jane increased her speed, but now more than ever it was imperative that she move silently, for the little animal below her was nervous and constantly alert. At the slightest unusual sound, it would be gone like a flash. Presently she came within range, but there was always intervening foliage that might deflect her arrow. Patience is the most important asset of the jungle hunter, and patience she had learned from Tarzan and from her own experiences. Now the antelope halted suddenly in its tracks and turned its head to the left. At the same instant Jane was aware of a movement in the underbrush in that direction. She saw that she could wait no longer, already something had startled her quarry. There was a small opening in the foliage between her and the antelope. Like lightning, she drew her bow, the string snapped with a whang and the shaft buried itself deep in the body of the antelope behind its left shoulder. It leaped high into the air and fell dead. Jane had reason to suspect that something else was stalking the antelope, but she could see nothing of it, and the turn in the trail had resulted in a crosswind that would carry the scent of the creature away from her. She knew that it was a risky thing to do, but she was hungry, and she was aware that all her companions were hungry. They must have food, for a cursory examination of the baggage had revealed the fact that besides some sandwiches which had already been eaten, their stock of provisions consisted of a few chocolate bars, 6 bottles of cognac and 2 of Coventry. Trusting to luck and pinning her faith in her speed, Jane dropped lightly to the trail and ran quickly to the fallen animal. She worked rapidly, as Tarzan had taught her to work. Slitting its throat to let it bleed, she quickly eviscerated it to reduce the weight, and as she worked, she heard again those stealthy sounds in the underbrush not far distant along the back trail. Her work completed, she closed the knife and slipped it into her pocket, then she raised the carcass of the little antelope to her shoulder. As she did so, an angry growl shattered the silence of the jungle, and Shieta, the leopard, stepped into the trail 20 paces from her. Instantly Jane saw that it would be impossible to escape with her kill, and resentment flared high in her bosom at the thought of relinquishing her prey to the savage cat. She felt reasonably sure that she could save herself by taking to the trees and leaving the carcass of the antelope to Shieta, but a sudden anger against the injustice of this contretemps impelled her to stand her ground and caused her to do a very foolish thing. Dropping the antelope, she strung her bow and pulling it back to the full limit of her strength she drove an arrow straight at the breast of Shieta. As it struck, the beast voiced a horrifying scream of pain and rage, then it charged. To those in the camp, the cry sounded almost human. "Sapristi! What was that?" cried Alexis. "Mon Dieu, it was a woman's scream," exclaimed Annette. "Lady Greystoke," said Brown, horrified. "Oh, Alexis, Alexis!" Annette, cried the princess, "my smelling salts, quick, I am going to faint." Brown seized the puny hand axe and started in the direction of the sound. "Oh, where are you going?" cried Kitty. "Don't leave me, don't leave me." "Shut up, you old fool," snapped Brown. "Lady Greystoke must be in trouble. I am going to find out." Tibbs pulled his empty pistol from his pocket. "I'll go with you, Mr. Brown," he said. "We can't let anything happen to milady." 10. Abduction. When Edeni refused to lead him to the village of the Kaviru, Tarzan was neither surprised nor disappointed. He knew men, and especially savage men, and the numerous taboos that govern their individual and tribal lives. He would have preferred to have gone to the chief of the Kaviru with one of his own people whom Tarzan had befriended, but if this were impossible, he was at least no worse off than he had been before he had met Edeni. And he was confident that no matter how brutal or savage the man might be, he was probably not without a spark of gratitude for the service Tarzan had rendered him. "If I came as a friend," said Tarzan, "surely there could be no harm in that." "The Kaviru have no friends," replied Edeni. "You must not come." The ape-man shrugged. "Then I shall come as an enemy." "You will be killed." "You saved my life. I do not wish you to be killed, but I could not prevent it. It is the law of the Kaviru." "Then you kill the girls that you steal," demanded the ape-man. "Who says that the Kaviru steal girls? It is well known among all people. Why do you do it? Have you not enough women of your own?" "There are no Kaviru women," replied Edeni. "The rains have come and gone as many times as there are fingers and toes upon 4 men since there was a Kaviru woman, since the last one gave her life that the men of the Kaviru might live." 80 years since there have been women among you," demanded the ape-man. "That is impossible, Edeni, for you are still a young man, and you must have had a mother, but perhaps she was not a Kaviru." "My mother was a Kaviru, but she died long before the last woman. But I have told you too much already, stranger. The ways of the Kaviru are not as the ways of lesser people, and they are not for the ears of lesser people. To speak of them is taboo. Go your way now, and I will go mine." Convinced that he could get no more information from Edeni, Tarzan took to the trees, and a moment later was lost to the sight of the Kaviru. Purposely he had gone toward the west so that Edeni would be deceived into thinking that he was not on the right trail toward the Kaviru country. However, he did not go far in that direction, but quickly doubled back toward the spot where he had left the white savage, for he was determined that if Edeni would not lead him willingly to his village, he should do so unknowingly. When Tarzan had returned to the spot where he killed the lion, the Kaviru was no longer there, and assuming that he had gone toward the north, his pursuer set off in that direction. After pursuing a northerly course for a short time, Tarzan realized that there were no indications that his quarry had come this way. Quickly he started a great circle in order to pick up the scent spoor. For an hour he ranged through forest and open glade before, at last, the wind, carried to his nostrils the scent spoor of Edeni, and when at last he came upon the object of his search, Tarzan was perplexed, for the Kaviru was moving due south. Tarzan reasoned that Edeni might be doing this to throw him off the trail, or perchance he had misinformed him as to the location of the Kaviru village, but he was sure now that if he clung tenaciously to the trail, Edeni would eventually lead him to his goal. Back over the long trail he had come since he had escaped from the village of Udalo, the chief, Tarzan dogged the footsteps of his quarry, yet never once was Edeni aware that he was being followed, though oftentimes he was plainly visible to the ape-man. Tarzan found it interesting to study this strange creature whose very existence was tinged with mystery. He noted the weapons and the ornaments of Edeni and saw that they differed from any that he had ever seen before. He was particularly interested in the slender fiber rope that was wrapped many times around the Kaviru's waist, for of all the savages in the jungle, as far as Tarzan knew, he alone used a rope as a weapon. He wondered just how Edeni would use it. Late one afternoon, when Tarzan knew they must be approaching the village of the Bukina, he was surprised to see Edeni take to the trees, through which he moved with considerable agility and speed, though in no respect to compare with those of the Lord of the Jungle. He moved with the utmost wariness, stopping often to listen intently. Presently he uncoiled the rope from about his waist, and Tarzan saw there was a running noose in one end of it. Now Tarzan heard voices ahead of them. They came faintly as from a great distance. It was evident that the Kavuru heard them, too, for he slightly changed his direction to bear more in that from which the voices came. Tarzan was keenly interested. The attitude of the man in front of him was that of the keen hunter, stalking his prey. He felt that one mystery was about to be cleared up. In a short time, the Kavuru came to the edge of a clearing and halted. Below him, working in the small fields, were a number of women. Edeni looked them over. Presently he espied a girl of about 15 and made his way to another tree nearer her. Tarzan followed, watching intently every move of the Kavuru. He heard him voice a strange call, so low that it must barely have reached the ears of the girl. For a moment she paid no attention to it, and then presently she turned and looked with dull, uncomprehending eyes toward the jungle. The sharpened stick with which she had been cultivating the maize dropped from her limp hand. Edeni continued to voice that weird, insistent call. The girl took a few steps in the direction of the jungle, then she paused, and Tarzan could almost sense the struggle that was going on within her breast to overcome the mysterious urge that was drawing her away from the other women. But Edeni's voice was insistent and compelling, and at last she again moved listlessly toward him. She moved as one in a trance, with staring eyes fixed on Edeni. Now the Kavuru retreated slowly deeper into the forest, calling, always calling to the helpless girl that followed. Tarzan watched, nor did he make any effort to interfere. To him, the life of the black girl was no more than the life of an antelope or that of any other beast of the jungle. To Tarzan, all were beasts, including himself, and none with any rights greater than another, except that which he might win by strength or cunning or ferocity. Much more important than the life of the black girl was the possibility of fathoming the mystery that had always surrounded the disappearance of girls supposed to have been taken by the Kavuru. Edeni lured the girl deeper into the forest, halting at last upon a broad limb. Slowly the girl approached. It was evident that she was not the master of her own will. The weird, monotonous droning chant of the Kavuru seemed to have numbed all her faculties. At last, she came directly beneath the tree and the branch where Edeni crouched. Then the man dropped his noose about her. She made no outcry, no protest, as he tightened it and drew her slowly up toward him, nor ever once did the chant cease. Removing the rope from about her, he threw her limp body across one of his broad shoulders and turning, started back in the direction from which he had come. Tarzan had watched the abduction of the girl with keen interest, for it explained the seeming mystery of the disappearance of so many other young girls during past times. He could readily understand the effect that these mysterious disappearances would have upon the superstitious minds of the natives, yet it was all very simple except the strange, hypnotic power of the Kavuru. That was not at all clear to him. He wondered how the natives had come to connect these disappearances with the Kavuru, and the only reasonable explanation seemed to be that in times past some exceptionally tenacious relatives had prosecuted their search until they had come by accident upon the abductor and his prey and so learned the identity of the former without ascertaining the method he had used to achieve his ends. Feeling no responsibility in the matter, Tarzan was not moved by any impulse to rescue the girl, his only concern now being to follow Edeni back to the village of the Kavuru, where he was confident he would find Muviro's daughter, Bwaira, if she still lived. Edeni kept to the trees for hours, until he must have been reasonably certain that he had passed beyond the point where possible pursuers would be likely to search, since they had no trail to follow. Then he came to the ground, but he still carried the girl, who lay across his shoulder as one dead. On and on he plodded, apparently tireless, and in the trees just behind him followed Tarzan of the apes. It was very late in the afternoon when the Kavuru halted. He carried the girl into a tree then, and tied her securely to a branch with the same rope that had snared her. Leaving her, he departed, and Tarzan followed him. Edeni was merely searching for food, and when he found some edible fruits and nuts, he returned with them to the girl. The hypnosis which had held her in its spell for so long was now relinquishing its hold upon her, and as Edeni approached her she looked at him with startled eyes and shrank away when he touched her. Releasing her bonds, he carried her to the ground and offered her food. By this time, full consciousness had returned, and it was evident that the girl was aware of her plight and the identity of her abductor, for an expression of utter horror distorted her features, and then she burst into tears. "Shut up," snapped Edeni. "I have not hurt you. If you give me no trouble, I shall not hurt you." "You are a Kavuru," she gasped in horror-laden tones. "Take me back to my father. You promised him that you would not harm any member of his family." Edeni looked at the girl in surprise. "I promised your father," he demanded. "I never saw your father. I have never spoken to one of your men." "You did. You promised him when he liberated you from the hut in which Udalo had you bound. Udalo would have killed you. My father, Gupingu, the witch doctor, saved you. Because of that you made the promise." This recital made no impression upon Edeni, but it did upon the grim and silent watcher in the trees above. So this was the daughter of Gupingu. Apparently fate was a capricious wench with a strange sense of humor. Knowledge of the identity of the girl gave a new complexion to the affair. Tarzan felt that by accepting his freedom at the hands of Gupingu he had given the witch doctor passive assurance that his daughters would be safe from the Kavuru. It was a moral obligation that the Lord of the Jungle could not ignore, but if he took the girl from Edeni and returned her to her people, he would be unable to follow the Kavuru to his village. However, with a shrug he accepted the responsibility that honor seemed to lay upon him. Now he devoted himself to a consideration of ways and means. He could, of course, go down and take the girl by force, for it never occurred to him that any creature, least of all man, might be able to prevent him from having his way, but this plan he scarcely considered before discarding it. He did not wish Edeni to know that it was he who took the girl from him, since he realized the possibility of Edeni being useful to him in the event that he reached the village of the Kavuru, for after all he had saved the man's life, and that was something that only the lowest of beasts might forget. He waited therefore to see what disposal Edeni would make of the girl for the night, for he had it in mind now to take her by stealth, and if that failed, the likelihood of Edeni recognizing him would be greatly lessened after dark, and so he waited, patient as any other beast of prey that watches for the propitious moment to attack. Seeing that she would be unable to move the Kavuru by her pleas, the girl had lapsed into silence. Her brooding eyes glowered sullenly at her captor. Fear and hate were reflected in them. Darkness was approaching rapidly when the Kavuru seized the girl and threw her roughly to the ground. She fought like a young lioness, but Edeni was powerful and soon overcame her. Then he deftly bound her hands behind her back and trussed her legs so tightly that she could scarcely move them. Terrified, she lay trembling. "Now," he said, when he had finished, "you cannot run away. Edeni can sleep, you had better sleep, we have a long march tomorrow, and Edeni will not carry you." The girl made no reply. The man threw himself upon the ground near her. A silent figure moved stealthily closer in the trees above them. It was very dark and very quiet. Only the roar of a distant lion, coming faintly to their ears, gave evidence of life in the jungle. Tarzan waited patiently. By the man's regular breathing, he knew that Edeni slept, but his slumber was not yet deep enough to satisfy the ape-man. A half-hour passed, and then an hour. Edeni was sleeping very soundly now, but the girl had not yet slept. That was well, it was what Tarzan wished for. He bent low from the branch where he lay and spoke to the girl in a low whisper. "Do not cry out," he said. I am coming down to take you back to your people. Very gently he lowered himself to the ground. Even the girl beside whom he stood did not know that he had descended from the trees. He stooped over her with a sibilant caution on his lips. The girl was afraid, but she was more afraid of the Kavuru, and so she made no outcry as Tarzan raised her to his shoulder and carried her silently along the jungle trail until he could take to the trees with less likelihood of arousing a deni. At a safe distance from the sleeping man he paused and cut the girl's bonds. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am the man that Udalo would have killed and that your father set free," replied the ape man. She shrank back. "Then you are a Kavuru, too," she said. "I am no Kavuru. I told them that, but they would not believe me. I am Tarzan of the Apes, chief of the Waziri whose country lies many marches toward the rising sun." "You are a Kavuru," she insisted, "my father said so." "I am not, but what difference does it make if I take you back to your father?" "How do I know that you will take me back?" she demanded. "Perhaps you are lying to me." "If you'd rather," said the ape man, "I will set you free now. But what will you do here alone in the jungle? A lion or a leopard will surely find you, and even if one did not, you might never find your way back to your village, because you do not know in what direction the Kavuru carried you while you were unconscious." "I will go with you," said the girl. 11. $70 million. Brown and Tibbs followed the game trail in the direction of the uncanny scream that had startled the camp. "Milady," shouted Tibbs. "Milady, where are you? What has happened?" Brown quickly forged ahead of Tibbs, who had not run 100 feet in 10 years. "Yes, miss," he bellowed, "where are you?" "Here, follow the trail," came back the answer in clear, unshaken tones. "I'm all right, don't get excited." Presently Brown came in sight of her. She was withdrawing the last of 3 arrows from the carcass of a leopard, and just beyond her lay the eviscerated carcass of an antelope. What's all this?" demanded Brown. "I just killed this bushbuck," explained Jane, "and Shieta here tried to take it away from me." "You killed him?" demanded Brown. "You killed him with your arrows?" "Well, I didn't bite him to death, Brown," laughed the girl. "Was it him or you that let out that yell?" "That was Shieta. He was charging, and when my first arrow struck him, he didn't seem to like it at all." "And one arrow settled him?" asked the pilot. "I let him have 2 more. I don't know which one stopped him. All 3 went into his heart." Brown wiped the perspiration from his forehead. "By golly," he said, "I've got to take my hat off to you, miss." "Well, you can put it back on, Brown, and pack that antelope back to camp. I'll like that a whole lot better." Tibbs had come up and was standing in wide-eyed astonishment gazing at the dead leopard. "If I may make so bold, milady, I might say that it's most extraordinary. I would never have believed it, milady, upon my honor, I wouldn't. I never thought those little arrows would kill anything bigger than a bird." "You'd be surprised, Tibbs," said Jane. "I am, milady." "Do we take the cat back to camp, too?" asked Brown. "No," replied Jane. "Saving the pelt is too much of a job, and, besides that, Princess Sporove would probably collapse with fright at sight of it." The pilot picked up the carcass of the antelope, and together the 3 returned to camp. Annette was standing wide-eyed, awaiting them. She breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that all 3 had returned safely. "Oh," she cried, "you really got something to eat. I am so hungry." "Where are the prince and princess?" demanded Jane. Annette snickered, and pointed toward the shelter. "As soon as Brown and Tibbs left, they ran in there and hid," she whispered. Almost immediately the prince appeared. He was very white, and he was also very angry. You men had no right running off and leaving this camp unguarded, he snapped. There's no telling what might have happened. Hereafter, see that both of you are never absent at the same time. Oh, Lord, give me strength, groaned Brown. I am long-suffering, but I can't stand much more of this bozo. What's that? Demanded Alexis. I was just going to say that if you ever shoot off your yap in that tone of voice to me again, I'm going to make a king out of you. What? Demanded Alexis, suspiciously. I'm going to crown you. I suppose that is another weird Americanism, sneered the prince, but whatever it is, coming from you, I know it is insulting. And how? Exclaimed Brown. Instead of standing around here quarreling, said Jane, let's get busy. Brown, will you and Tibbs build a fire, please? Alexis, you can cut up the antelope. Cut 5 or 6 good-sized steaks, and then Annette can cook them. Do you know how to grill them over an open fire, Annette? No, madam, but I can learn, if you'll just show me once. The princess emerged from the shelter. Oh, my dear, whatever have you there? She demanded. Oh, take it away, it's all covered with blood. That's your supper, Kitty, said Jane. Eat that thing? Oh, don't, I shall be ill. Take it away and bury it. Well, here's your chance to reduce, lady, said Brown, because if you don't eat that, you ain't going to eat nothing. How dare you, Brown, intimate that you would even think of keeping food away from me, demanded the princess. I ain't going to keep no food away from you. I'm just trying to tell you that there ain't no food except this. If you won't eat this, you don't eat, that's all. Oh, I never could bring myself really, my dear, how it smells. Less than an hour later, the princess was tearing away at an antelope steak like a famished wolf. How perfectly thrilling, she took time out to remark. I mean, isn't it just like camping out? Quite similar, said Jane, dryly. Terrible, said Alexis, this steak is much too rare. Hereafter, Annette, see that mine are quite well done. You take what you get, playboy, and like it, said Brown. And hereafter don't use that tone of voice in speaking to Annette or anyone else in this bunch. Tibbs was very much embarrassed. He always was when what he considered a member of the lower classes showed lack of proper deference to one of what he liked to call the aristocracy. If I may make so bold as to inquire, milady, he said, addressing Jane in an effort to divert the conversation into another channel, might I ask how we are going to get out of here and back to civilization? I've been thinking a lot about that myself, Tibbs, replied Jane. You see, if we were all in good physical condition, we might follow this stream down to a larger river when eventually we would be sure to come to a native village where we could get food and employ guides and carriers to take us on to some settlement where there are Europeans, or, failing in that, we could at least hire runners to carry a message out for us. I think that is a splendid idea, milady, I hope we start soon. I doubt that we could all stand the hardships of a long trek, said Jane. I suppose you mean me, my dear, said the princess, but really I am very fond of walking. I remember I used to walk a mile every morning. That was before dear Mr. Peters passed on. He insisted upon my doing it, he was such an athletic man himself. He played golf every Wednesday afternoon. But after he went, I gave it up, it hurt my feet so. We could build a litter, suggested Alexis. I have seen pictures of them in the cinema. Brown and Tibbs could carry the princess. Yeah, demanded Brown, and who'd carry you? Oh, I think that would be just wonderful, I mean, I think that would solve every problem, exclaimed Kitty. We could build the litter large enough for 2 and then we could both ride. Why not a 4-passenger job, demanded Brown, and then Tibbs and I could carry you all. Oh, no, exclaimed the princess. I'm afraid that would be much too heavy a load for you. The fellow is attempting to be facetious, my dear, said Alexis, but certainly there is no reason why they could not carry you. Except only one, said Brown. And pray, what is that? Asked Kitty. I mean, I see no reason why you and Tibbs should not carry me. It's absolutely out of the question, Kitty, said Jane, with some asperity. You simply don't know what you're talking about. 2 men could not carry anyone through this jungle, and no matter what you may think, you wouldn't last an hour if you tried to walk. Oh, but my dear Jane, what am I going to do, stay here forever? 1 or 2 of us will have to go out and look for help, the others will remain here in camp. That is the only way. Who's going? Asked Brown. Me and Tibbs. Jane shook her head. I'm afraid Tibbs couldn't make the grade, she said. He's never had any experience in anything of this sort, and anyway he'd be very much more useful in camp. I thought you and I should go. We know something about Africa, and how to take care of ourselves in the jungle. I don't know about that, said Brown. I don't see how both of us can go and leave these people. They are the most helpless bunch of yaps I've ever seen. The Burroughs showed their resentment of Brown's blunt appraisal, but they said nothing. Tibbs appeared shocked, but Annette turned away to hide a smile. I'll tell you what we'll do, continued the pilot. You stay here and take care of these people and run the camp. I'll go out and look for help. I wouldn't trust him, Jane, said Alexis. If he once got away, he'd never come back, he'd leave us here to die. Nonsense, snapped Jane. Brown is perfectly right in saying that both of us should not leave you. None of you is experienced, you couldn't find food, you couldn't protect yourselves. No, one of us will have to stay, and as I can travel faster through the jungle than any of you, I shall go out and look for help. There were several protesting voices raised against this program. Alexis sat regarding the girl through half-closed lids. He seemed to be appraising her. The expression in his eyes was not pleasant. Presently he spoke. You shouldn't go alone, Jane, he said. You're right in saying that I couldn't be of much help around the camp. I'll go with you, you should have someone to protect you. Brown laughed, a very rude and annoying laugh. The princess looked shocked and startled. Why, Alexis, she cried, I am surprised that you would even suggest such an impossible thing. Think of Jane's reputation. It was now Jane's turn to laugh. My dear Kitty, she cried, don't be ridiculous. Of course, I don't intend to let Alexis go with me, but not for the reason that you suggest. When one's life is at stake, one may ride roughshod over conventions. Naturally, agreed the prince. Well, said the princess, definitely, Alexis may go, but if he goes, I go with him. That's right, said Alexis, you got us into this mess, and now you're trying to put obstacles in the way of our getting ourselves out of it. If it were not for you, we could all leave together, and as for that, if it hadn't been for you and your American pilot, we wouldn't be in this fix now. Oh, Alexis, sobbed the princess, how can you be so cruel to me? You don't love me anymore. He shot a contemptuous glance at her, and turned and walked away. There was an uncomfortable silence that was finally broken by Jane. I shall leave in the morning, she said, very early. Do you think, Brown, that you could provide food for these people while I am away? I reckon I can if they're light eaters and ain't particular what they eat, he replied, with a grin. Do you know which plants and fruits are edible and which are unsafe? She asked. I know enough of the safe ones to get by on, he said, and I'll leave the others alone. That's right, be very careful about what you eat and drink. Brown grinned. We won't have much to be careful about. In the growing coolness of the jungle night, the warmth of the beast fire was pleasant, and most of the party remained around it. Only Alexis, moody and sullen, holding aloof. He stood in the opening of the men's shelter, glowering at the figures illuminated by the fire. His dark eyes rested upon his wife, who sat with her back toward him, and his expression at this time that he was free from observation was marked with loathing. The thoughts that were passing through his petty brain were not lovely thoughts. In the outer rim of the light from the fire, he looked what he was, a small, cheap grafter who had suddenly become sinister and dangerous. And then his eyes moved on to Jane and his expression changed. He licked his full, weak lips that were flabby and repulsive. His gaze wandered again to his wife. If it were not for you, he thought, $70 million, I wish I were out of here. That fellow, Brown, I'd like to kill him. Annette's not so bad looking. $70 million, Paris, nice, Monte Carlo, the old fool. Jane is beautiful. I suppose the old fool will live forever. Dead, $70 million. Over by the fire, Jane was arranging for the guarding of the camp by night. I think 3-4-hour shifts will be long enough, she said. It's just a matter of keeping the fire going. If any animals come around, you'll be able to see their eyes shining in the dark. If they come too close, light a brand and throw it at them. They are all afraid of fire. Oh, my dear, do I have to do that? Cried Kitty. I never could, really. I mean, do I have to sit out here alone at night? No, my dear, said Jane, you'll be excused from guard duty. How about you, Annette? Do you think you could do it? I can do my share, madam, said the girl, whatever the others do. Atta girl, said Brown. If I may make so bold as to suggest it, milady, said Tibbs, deferentially, I rather think the 3 men should stand guard. It's no job for a lady. I think Tibbs is perfectly right, said the princess. And I really think that Alexis should not stand guard. He's a very susceptible person to colds, and night air always affects him, and now I think that I shall go to bed. Annette, come and help me. You'd better turn in, too, miss, said Brown. If you're going to start out early in the morning, you'll need all the sleep you can get. Jane rose. Perhaps you're right, she said. Good night. When she had gone, Brown glanced at his watch. It's 9 o'clock now, Tibbs. Suppose you stand guard until midnight, then wake me, and I'll take it until 3. After that, his nibs, the Grand Duke, can watch until morning. Really, Mr. Brown, if you mean the prince, I rather fancy he won't be caring to stand guard. Well, he's going to, said Brown, and he's going to like it. Tibbs sighed. If it weren't for the princess, he said, we wouldn't have to stay here at all. I don't fancy staying here and just waiting. I'm sure something terrible will happen to us if Lady Greystoke leaves us. She's the only one that can do anything. Yes, said Brown, the old girl is a damned nuisance. You might bump her off, Tibbs. Brown grinned, rose, and stretched. I'll be turning in, Tibbsy. Wake me at midnight. Sporove was sitting in the entrance of the shelter, which was only a few steps from the fire, and as Brown entered, he spoke to him. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Tibbs, he said. I am perfectly willing to do my share. Call me at 3, and I will stand guard. I'm going to bed now. I am a very sound sleeper, and you may have difficulty in waking me. The change in the man's tone and attitude so surprised Brown that for once he had no reply to make. He merely grunted as he passed on into the shelter. Sporove followed and lay down, and in a few moments Brown was fast asleep. It seemed to him when Tibbs woke him at midnight that he had not slept at all. He had been on guard but a few minutes when Annette joined him. She came and sat down beside him. What the dickens are you doing up this time of the morning, girlie? He demanded. Something awoke me about half an hour ago, she said, and I haven't been able to get back to sleep. I don't know what it could have been, but I awoke with a start, and I had a feeling that there was someone crawling around inside the hut. You know, it's really very dark in there after the curtain is hung up in front of the door.